Chapter 3364. Yes, we have to prepare in advance. Guan Shili nodded and said, now that the news has spread, people from all over the world will probably come to Mount E to watch the battle between Moze and Sovereign Tongtian in a month's time. Although Moze is now at the Divine King level, we don't know if Sovereign Tongtian has any ultimate moves, so we have to be careful. I know, Feng Jiu replied. She took a sip of wine from her glass. In the backyard, Leng Shuang put on the newly bought clothes for the little girl and said to her, let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she walked out. Outside, Hao, who had already bathed and changed into clean clothes, was waiting at the door. When he saw the door open and an adult and a child walk out, he walked forward and called out, Aunt Shuang. Your mother and the others are in front, let's go. Leng Shuang said and held his hand as they walked forward. Behind them, the little girl touched her new clothes lovingly. It was the first time she had worn such clean and beautiful new clothes, so she was very happy. When she heard the sound, she looked up and saw the woman in black holding the hand of a child who was the same age as her. The child didn't turn around, so she couldn't see his face. However, after thinking about it, she still followed behind them. Her eyes darted around from time to time as she looked at the small figure with curiosity and surprise, trying to guess his identity. Mother, uncle, Aunt Hua. Hao followed Leng Shuang in and jogged to Feng Jiu's side, calling out to the three of them one by one. Feng Jiu reached out and picked him up, you look good after you've washed up. She carried him to a chair and sat him down. Mother ordered a lot of dishes, take a look and see what you like to eat. Thank you, Mother. Hao said and picked up his chopsticks to eat. Feng Jiu looked at the little girl standing at the side. She smiled and asked, what's your name? I don't have a name. The little girl lowered her head and said. Feng Jiu thought about it and said, I can find a family to adopt you and let you grow up safely. You can also stay and be my son's servant. Which one do you want to choose? Hearing this, the little girl was stunned. She looked at Hao, who was eating and asked, he's a little beggar. Why did he look different? Only his voice was the same. He's not a little beggar, he's my son. Feng Jiu said and looked at the little girl. What do I do as a servant? Is it to play with him? She asked in confusion. Maidservant, in the future, someone will naturally tell you what you want to do. Right now, you only need to tell me which one you want to choose. I'll stay and follow him. The little girl looked at Hao. Seeing this, Feng Jiu said, if you stay, from this moment onwards, you will be called master, and your life will no longer be yours. Are you still willing to stay? Yes. The little girl nodded. Feng Jiu said, all right. From today on, you'll be called Little Five. He glanced at Leng Shuang. Leng Shuang walked forward and said to the little girl, come with me. The little girl looked at Hao and saw that he didn't speak or look at her. She lowered her head and followed Leng Shuang downstairs. Chapter 3365. Feng Jiu smiled. Keep her for now. We'll see. She's just a little girl anyway. How big of a deal was that? If this little girl was obedient and kept her place, then she could stay. If she was prone to betrayal in the future, then she could be erased. In her opinion, she had given the opportunity. Whether she could seize it or resist all the temptations in the future would depend on the situation. After all, not everyone was as loyal as Leng Shuang and Leng Hua. She said these words in front of Hao because she wanted him to know that he should be wary of others. However, she believed that after experiencing life these past few days, he should have seen through a lot of human affairs. Hao lowered his head and ate. He didn't speak but listened carefully. He picked up a piece of meat for Feng Jiu and said, Mother, eat. Good boy, Hao, eat more. Feng Jiu smiled and patted his head. Then, he also picked up his chopsticks. Guan Shilin laughed loudly. Come, come, come. Let's eat. After eating, take Hao out for a walk. Go shopping and buy some small things. You haven't taken him around since you came back. That's true. Feng Jiu looked at Hao and said, Hao about we go shopping with you after eating? Okay. Hao answered. Because he thought that they would accompany him to play in the city, he sped up. When they saw this, they shook their heads and laughed. They chatted while drinking wine. On the first floor, the little girl looked at the food on the table. There was meat, vegetables, and snacks. She was dazzled and happy. Are these all for me? She looked at Leng Shuang and asked. Yes, eat. Leng Shuang said. He turned and walked upstairs. Seeing him leave, the little girl immediately reached out to pick up something to eat. When the waiter in the corner saw this, he quickly walked out. Don't use your hands. Use chopsticks. Oh. The little girl answered. She picked up her chopsticks and ate. Her eyes were bright as she asked, Who are they? Is their family rich? When the waiter heard this, he sneered, Eat your food. This little girl's luck was good, but whether she could bear it or not, that was hard to say. Not long after, Wei Feng and Guemo also came to the restaurant. They approached Feng Jiu and said, Master, it's already taken care of. Feng Jiu responded and waved his hand, indicating for them to leave. Mother, how are those people? Hao asked. He knew that Wei Feng and the others had gone to deal with those little beggars that he'd crippled. Actually, he'd only crippled an arm and a leg, and he could already be considered to have been merciful. Out of Foursquare City. Feng Jiu looked at Hao and said, Many times, being lenient will bring endless trouble to yourself. When it's time to make a decision, you have to be decisive. You can't hesitate, understand? Yes. Hao responded. After he finished eating the food in his bowl, he said, Mother, there's a place to row boats in the west of the city. Mother, I want to row a boat there. Okay, Mother will take you there. Feng Jiu smiled and took Hao out with them. On the other hand, Leng Shuang brought the little girl back to the estate. Chapter 3366. Mother, why do they keep looking at us? Hao asked in a low voice. He saw that the people behind them were looking at them from time to time. Some of them were even walking behind them. They were looking at them while whispering to them. Feng Jiu smiled slightly and said, You have to get used to this kind of gaze. When you grow up, you will still encounter such things. You just have to be yourself in the face of their curiosity and sizing you up. You don't have to care about their sizing up and discussion. Oh. Hao responded and looked away after glancing at them. Hao, take this. Guan Shilin bought a stick of candied haws from somewhere and handed it over. Thank you, uncle. Hao thanked him and reached out to take it. He took a bite. It was sour and sweet. It was very delicious. Is it good? Guan Shilin asked with a smile. It's good. Hao responded with a big smile on his face. They shopped on the streets and occasionally entered some rare shops to buy some more expensive things. When they arrived at the west of the city, it was already evening. Qin Xian helped them book a lantern boat and let them all board. She sat at the bow and took out her zither to liven things up. Hao couldn't stay in the cabin and went to the bow. He saw Qin Xian playing the zither and the boatman rowing the boat at the stern. His mother and uncle were chatting in the cabin. Therefore, he lay down on the deck and reached out to play with the lake water in front of him. It's so cold. The water is so clear. I wonder if there are fish in it. Hao said as he looked into the water curiously. He played with it with his little hands and could only faintly use his fingertips to pick up a few drops of water. Little master, you can't lie down and play with the water like this. It's very dangerous. Qin Xian stopped playing the zither and looked at Hao and said softly. I won't fall in. Hao said and played with the water again. He asked, will there be fish in the lake? There will definitely be fish in the lake. Qin Xian put away the zither and walked to Hao's side to guard him in case he fell into the lake. It would be great if I could go into the lake to catch fish. It must be very fun. After all, he was a 6-year-old child, and his nature was naturally playful. Qin Xian smiled and was about to speak. Suddenly, her expression changed. She reached out and picked up Hao, who was lying on the bedboard. Then, she quickly stepped aside. It was also at this moment that a hand suddenly shot out from the originally calm surface of the lake. That hand directly reached out from the water to grab Hao. If she hadn't reacted quickly and carried Hao away, Hao would probably have been pulled into the lake by that hand. The sound of splashing water broke the calm surface of the lake. Almost at that moment, more than 20 figures flew out from the bottom of the lake. They pointed their swords at the ship and quickly attacked. If one paid close attention, one would notice that those people looked like they were attacking Fengjiu and the others, but in fact, they were targeting Hao. Fengjiu and the others flew out from the cabin. Seeing the surrounding black-clothed people, her eyes turned cold. She emitted a suppressive force from her body with her as the center. The powerful force instantly shocked those black-clothed people, making them unable to move. Chapter 3367. Roar. Ah! Hao cried out in shock when he saw the huge mouth of the beast and the sharp teeth of the beast swaying in front of his eyes. Just as the beast was about to bite him, a ray of light suddenly flashed out of Hao's body and a wolf howl sounded. In the next moment, the snow-white silver wolf that suddenly appeared tore off a piece of the beast's flesh. Roar! A woo! Fengjiu and the others came to Qin Xian's side to protect Hao. At the same time, their eyes flashed when they saw the snow-white silver wolf that rushed out. After calming down for a while, Fengjiu's spiritual power surged. As the flames burned, a whirlpool suddenly appeared on the calm lake. The whirlpool was so big that it pulled the surrounding lake water up. Just as the boat was about to fall in, Fengjiu and the others stepped on the wind and flew up. They even grabbed the old man rowing the boat and brought him to the shore. Just as they flew out of the whirlpool, the boat on the lake was also swallowed up and disappeared into the whirlpool. Looking at the disappearing black figures, Fengjiu's eyes flashed. He pursed his lips and no one knew what he was thinking. Guan Shilin looked at this scene and frowned. They were clearly here just now. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared. He looked at Fengjiu and asked, "What do you think? Right now, who was it that was attacking them?" Moreover, they actually used the power of the lake water to activate the teleportation array. After the sneak attack failed, they didn't continue fighting and quickly left. That well-trained method and the intention to attack Hao. Could it be that these people were sent by the sovereign of sky reaching? Now that both sides had agreed to battle at Mount Shao, they actually wanted to capture Hao to threaten them. Qin Xian brought Hao back to the shore. Fengjiu and the others also landed one after another. He came to them and asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Qin Xian said and looked at Hao. "Mother, those people wanted to capture me." As Hao spoke, he couldn't help but shudder. Just now, that ferocious beast suddenly opened its big mouth, revealing sharp teeth, and pounced on him. That kind of fear of being devoured in the next moment made his heart tremble violently. Fengjiu rubbed his head and didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the silver wolf that was pouncing on the lake water. He looked at her with excitement and joy and then looked at Hao. "Go back to the space first," Fengjiu said and glanced at the wolf, telling it to go back to the space to avoid causing too much commotion. That. She walked forward and released her divine sense to scan the lake before her, saying, someone has set up a teleportation array here, and its aura is very strong. I think it might really be Sovereign Tongtian. Right now, apart from Sovereign Tongtian, no one else would have any ideas about how. However, Sovereign Tongtian was a sovereign after all. How could he still think of using despicable means to capture How after the battle on the summit? This was too despicable. It seems that he doesn't have the confidence to defeat Mose. Otherwise, why would he think of capturing How? Guan Shilin said and looked at Fengjiu. Keep a close eye on How during this period. Don't let anything happen to him. It would be really troublesome if How fell into the hands of the Sovereign of Sky Reaching. Chapter 3368. When the group returned to the residence, Fengjiu took How back to his room to rest. Seeing that his face was still pale, she asked, "Are you afraid?" After all, he was only a 6-year-old child. Even an adult would not be able to calm down when he saw the ferocious beast pouncing on him and biting him. Yes. How replied. He held her hand with both hands and said softly, "Mother, am I very useless?" He did not want to be afraid, but when he thought of the previous scene, he could not help but feel afraid. It's okay. How is already very powerful. She patted his hand and coaxed softly, "Be good. You'll be fine after sleeping." How listened to her and closed his eyes. However, as soon as he closed his eyes, he thought of the ferocious beast pouncing on him and opened his eyes again in fear. Mother, How doesn't dare to sleep. Seeing that he was frightened, Fengjiu's eyes flashed with worry. She comforted him softly and said, "It's okay. Mother will chat with you. Let's let Qin Xian come in and play the zither. We can chat while listening to the zither, okay?" "Yes, Mother, stay with me. Don't go." He held her hand tightly, afraid that she would leave. "Okay, Mother won't go." Fengjiu said softly and called out, "Qin Xian." Qin Xian walked in from outside and called out, "Master." She looked at How on the bed. "Qin Xian, play a song." Fengjiu looked at her but did not say what song to play. "Yes." Qin Xian responded and walked to the side to sit down. She took out the zither from her space and played a calming lullaby. The pleasant sound of the zither rang in the room. The sound of the zither was gentle and seemed to brush past How's fearful heart. He gradually relaxed and blinked his eyes to look at Fengjiu sitting by the bed. Fengjiu accompanied him and told him the funny stories when she pretended to be a beggar. As time went by, he gradually fell asleep under Qin Xian's hypnosis. She couldn't help but feel sorry for the little fellow who was still holding her hand tightly even though he was asleep. This child was really frightened today. In the past, he had brought him to the forest for training, but he had never experienced such a situation where he almost died in the mouth of a beast. Today's scene seemed to have frightened him quite a bit. "Okay, he's asleep." Fengjiu whispered to Qin Xian, indicating that she didn't need to play anymore. Fengjiu carefully pulled her hand out of his grasp and covered him with the quilt. Then, she walked out with light footsteps. Qin followed behind her and left the room. When they arrived at the courtyard, Fengjiu glanced at the room and said, "Qin Xian, you stay here and look after How. Yes." Qin Xian responded and watched her and Leng Shuang turn and walk out. Only then did she go back to the room to guard. In the hall, Guan Shilin and the others were all there. At this time, when they saw Fengjiu come in, they asked, "How is How? Just now, the boy didn't look right. He seemed to be frightened." "He was a little frightened, but he's fine. He's asleep," Fengjiu said and sat down in the main seat. He said to Du Fan and the others, "Investigate who those people are. In addition, strengthen the patrol in the mansion and pay more attention to the city." "Yes." Chapter 3369. Aren't you planning to leave for Mount Peng in a few days? Are you bringing Hao-er with you? Wanyan Qianhua, who was sitting at the side, asked her. Yes, I'll be more at ease with him by my side, Fengjiu said. Seeing this, Wanyan Qianhua said, I think I can help you look after Hao-er on this trip. If you bring him to the sect, he should be very safe. The sect of the Cerulean planet? Fengjiu shook his head, it's not safe there either. There are some demonic cultivators hiding there. I met them last time, but I don't know if they've been caught. Is that so? Wanyan Qianhua was slightly surprised. She turned her beautiful eyes and asked, You've only been back for a few days. When did you go to the sect? Why didn't I know about it? Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled embarrassedly, I didn't go for long. I went for a while and left some instructions for CK and the others. Then I came back. Oh. Wanyan Qianhua nodded, but her eyes were still on Fengjiu. Obviously, she didn't believe what she said. After giving instructions to everyone in the hall, Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua walked to the backyard. The two chatted as they walked. After they sat down in the pavilion, Wanyan Qianhua rested her chin on her hand and looked at her with her beautiful eyes, asking, You went to the sect to look for Junju Shang. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. Fengjiu smiled, I've been curious about what kind of person Junju Shang is for a long time. I never had the chance to meet him, so after you got drunk that night, I went to the sect to see what kind of man could make you fall in love with him, so that she looked at her with a smile and said, I did see him. I wanted to take a look and leave, but who knew that he would discover me? However, I don't think his condition is too good. Wanyan Qianhua, who had been listening quietly, saw her stop after she finished speaking. He couldn't help but look up at her. The situation isn't good? What do you mean? He has an inner demon, so he must have been tormented by it. When I arrived, it was already very late, but he was still awake. He was sitting there reading a book, but he didn't turn the page for a long time. Clearly, he was distracted. That's right, I left a corner of my clothes hanging down at that time. He probably mistook me for you when he didn't see me. Fengjiu smiled. When she thought of Junju Shang's expression at that time, she knew that he wanted to know. At least, after meeting him, she didn't think that he wasn't attracted to her sister. Wanyan Qianhua listened in a daze. No one knew what he was thinking. Sister, I don't think he has no feelings for you. From my experience, he should have fallen in love with you, but he doesn't know it. Fengjiu sighed softly. She looked at her in a daze and said, The person you fell in love with is not an ordinary person. He is the leader of the Carefree sect, a cultivator who is many years older than you. There are too many obstacles between the two of you. It won't be easy to overcome them. I don't have feelings for him anymore. Wanyan Qianhua said with a cold face. He turned his gaze elsewhere. Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled and agreed with him. Yes, you don't have feelings for him. He has fallen in love with you, but he doesn't know how to say it. You should just ignore him and let him be troubled by his inner demon. Who asked him to make you sad? Isn't that right? Chapter 3370. Looking at her expression, Fengjiu patted her hand and stood up. Sister, I'm going to find Zhe. You can sit here for a while. With that, she left first. It was better to let them deal with their relationship problems themselves. Even if she wanted to help, she had no way of doing it. Especially when her sister said that she didn't love him anymore, but she couldn't let go of him in her heart. She was also someone who had been through this. However, her relationship with Zhe had always been stable and trusting. There had never been any doubt, betrayal, or sadness. Therefore, compared to them, the two of them were really very happy. Moreover, they were preparing to get married. After they got married, they would have their own children and a family that belonged to them. Thinking of this, her footsteps became lighter. She walked all the way to the back of the mountain and arrived at the cave residence. Seeing Mose sitting cross-legged inside, she sat down beside him. "Why are you here?" Xianyuan Mose opened his eyes and looked at her. Recently, he had been quietly cultivating here. He wasn't cultivating, but meditating. Fengjiu reached out and hugged his arm. She leaned her head on his shoulder and said, "Today, I took Hao-er out to play. We encountered an ambush and Hao-er was frightened." Xianyuan Mose frowned slightly. "Who was it? Do you have any clues?" With their current reputation, someone actually dared to ambush them? It could be imagined that the other party had a motive. "We don't know if it was Sovereign Tongtian's people because those people were targeting Hao-er." She sighed softly. "He was frightened and couldn't sleep when he came back. I asked Qin Xian to play a hypnotic calming song to make him fall asleep. I heard from Elder Mei that he has already informed his biological parents. After seeing his parents, if he is willing, let him go back. Perhaps Feng and the others will be better taken care of. Moreover, with Sovereign Xuanwu's current strength and power, he should be able to protect him." Hearing this, Fengjiu was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We'll see about this when the time comes. What kind of people his biological parents are, we still have to meet them to know." Xianyuan Mose's lips curled into a faint smile. He reached out and hugged her, letting her lean into his embrace. The two of them sat together quietly, feeling each other's presence. When the sky darkened, the two of them left the back of the mountain together. When they walked to the front of their courtyard, Leng Hua came up to them. "Yama God, Master." Leng Hua bowed to the two of them and then stepped forward. "Young Master Mo Chen is here. He is sitting in the courtyard." Hearing this, Xianyuan Mose's expression changed slightly. His deep gaze looked towards the courtyard in front of him. He pursed his lips and didn't say anything. Fengjiu, on the other hand, was delighted. "When did they arrive? Why didn't you call us?" As she spoke, she held Xianyuan Mose's hand and walked forward. Leng Hua slowed his steps. He beckoned a servant girl over and gave her instructions. Then he walked inside. He didn't enter the courtyard, but stood outside. Mo Chen, who was drinking tea in the courtyard, heard Fengjiu's voice before he even saw her. When he heard her voice, his hand paused. A dark light flashed through his deep eyes. When he looked up again, that light had already disappeared. Chapter 3371. Mo Chen, it's really been a long time. How have you been? Fengjiu stepped forward with a smile. As he stepped forward, he loosened his grip on Xianyuan Mose's hand. Xianyuan Mose lowered his gaze and looked at his empty hand. For some reason, he felt a little gloomy. He pursed his lips and glanced at Mo Chen, who was dressed in spotless white robes. Then, he stepped forward and sat down beside Fengjiu. "It's been a few years since we last met, but you're still as elegant as ever." As Xianyuan Mose spoke, he looked at Nalen Machen with a deep gaze. Compared to 5 years ago, Xianyuan Machen now had an extra sense of stillness. He could clearly feel that Nalen Mose was smiling, but it felt very distant. Especially the faint light emitted from his body, which was very conspicuous. It made him look like a luminous body in the night. Hearing their words, Mo Chen smiled warmly. He looked at them and said, "When I came here, I went to the Divine Temple on my master's orders and took over the position of Divine Temple Son. I've been cultivating in the sacred tower for the past few years. I only came out recently." In a few words, he briefly recounted what had happened in the past few years. He looked at the two of them and said, "It seems that you've had a lot of opportunities in the past few years. In 5 years, you've already become experts at the Divine King level." Fengjiu looked at him and smiled, "We've only been able to achieve this speed because of the help of pills. But you're different. You've taken one step at a time and now you're at the peak of the high god level. You're only one step away from becoming a divine king. He smiled and did not say much. He only said, I heard that you've arranged a battle with Sovereign Tong Tian on Mount E. Yes, that's right. Xianyuan Mose replied. Are you confident in a one-on-one battle? Mo Chen asked. It shouldn't be a problem. Xianyuan Mose said. That's good. Mo Chen nodded. He glanced at Fengjiu and said to Xianyuan Mose, You're not alone. You have to think about Jiu. If you don't have the confidence to fight, you should avoid it. Hearing his words, Fengjiu chuckled. Don't worry. Zhe knows what he's doing, and I have confidence in him. Mo Chen looked at her gently and asked, How have you been these past few years? When Xianyuan Mose heard this, he raised his eyebrows and said, She's doing well. You don't have to worry about her. By the way, after the Battle of Mount Shao, we'll prepare to go back and get married. You must come to our wedding then. Fengjiu glanced at Xianyuan Mose, who was rushing to speak, and smiled at Mo Chen. I've been doing well these past few years. We're going to get married, so you must prepare a congratulatory gift. You must come to our wedding as well. Hearing their words, Mo Chen smiled and asked, Are you going back to the Phoenix Dynasty to get married? Yes, we're getting married from the Phoenix Dynasty. Xianyuan Mose said. I'll definitely be there. I'll also prepare a generous gift for you. Mo Chen said gently and looked at Fengjiu. Jiu, I think you'll be happy when you marry Mose. Yes, we'll be happy. Fengjiu held Xianyuan Mose's hand and looked at Xianyuan Mose with a blissful smile. They looked at each other and smiled. Fengjiu looked at Mo Chen and said sincerely, Mo Chen, whoever marries you in the future will also be happy. Chapter 3372. Leng Hua ordered the servants to serve the food and wine, and let the three of them have a small gathering in the courtyard. That night, he listened to them chatting and laughing until late into the night. I can't drink anymore. I'm going back to rest. You guys should sleep early too. Mo Chen stood up, his footsteps slightly unsteady. Leng Hua, take Mo Chen to rest. Xianyuan Mose called out to Leng Hua outside. Yes. Leng Hua walked in and said to Mo Chen, Young Master Mo Chen, this way please. Thank you. He nodded to Leng Hua, then followed him out. Watching Mo Chen walk away, his figure swaying slightly, Fengjiu said, He drank a little too much tonight. It seems like he has something on his mind. Xianyuan Mose reached out and hugged her waist, saying, Don't worry. He'll be fine. He'll be fine after a good night's sleep. His deep eyes watched the white figure gradually disappear into the distance. When it disappeared from his sight, he held Fengjiu and walked to the back room, saying, You smell of alcohol. Why don't we take a bath? Yes, it'll be easier to sleep after a bath, Fengjiu said, then called out, Ling Shuang, get someone to prepare water for a bath. Yes. Outside, Ling Shuang came out of nowhere. After responding, she left. Compared to the two smiling people here, on the other side, Mo Chen entered the room, took off his coat, and lay down on the bed. As soon as he lay down on the bed, his whole body relaxed. He thought about what had happened tonight. He thought about the happiness in Fengjiu's eyes when she looked at Xianyuan Mose. He smiled and closed his eyes, murmuring, As long as you're happy, as long as you're happy. The next morning, Wanyan Qianhua was waiting for Fengjiu in the front courtyard. When she saw her come out, she said, Xiaojiu, I'm going back. I came to tell you. Back to the sect? Fengjiu looked at her and asked. Yes, there are some things I need to take care of. She said, looking into the distance. Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled, saying, Okay, then I won't keep you any longer. In a few days, we'll go to Sun Mountain. After the Battle of Sun Mountain, we'll go back to the Phoenix Dynasty to get married. You must come then. Hearing her words, Wanyan Qianhua revealed a charming smile. She reached out to hold her hand and said, "Don't worry. I'll definitely go, and I'll definitely bring you a big gift." Fengjiu pursed her lips and smiled, saying, "Then I'll thank you first, sister." She paused and looked at her. After hesitating for a while, she said, "Sister, although I feel that this is your Junju Shang's relationship and I can't help much, I want to give you a piece of advice. Follow your heart when it comes to relationships. Most of the time, no one is right or wrong. As long as you follow your heart and don't have any regrets, it will be fine." Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua was silent for a while. Finally, she nodded, saying, "Don't worry. I know." The two talked for a while, then Fengjiu saw her out. After watching her leave, she turned around and went back to Hao Er's courtyard to see how he was today. "Master." Qin Xin saw her come in and stood up to greet her. Chapter 3373. "He has been sleeping since last night," Qin Xin said as she looked at Hao who was lying on the bed. "Go and rest," Fengjiu said as he walked up to the bed and sat down. Katomi bowed and left the room, gently closing the door behind her. Fengjiu sat by the bed and looked at Hao who was sleeping soundly. Her heart softened. He had grown up from a small ball in her arms like a kitten. She had seen him grow up bit by bit over the years. The little guy was so good-looking. When he grew up in the future, he would definitely be a handsome man. She couldn't help but chuckle when she thought of the many women who adored this little guy in the future. "Mother?" Hao opened his eyes in a daze. He rubbed his eyes and looked at his mother who was sitting by the bed and smiling. "You're awake. Are you hungry?" she asked with a smile. She took him out of the quilt and helped him put on the clothes at the head of the bed. "Yes, yes." Hao nodded and looked at her with sleepy eyes, letting his mother help him put on his clothes. "Go and wash up. I'll wait for you outside." Fengjiu rubbed his head, carried him out of bed, and motioned for him to wash up by himself. Hao answered and walked out. Fengjiu went outside to wait while instructing the maidservants who were guarding outside to prepare breakfast. Not long after, Hao came out and held Fengjiu's hand. "Let's go. We'll eat in the main courtyard. Your father and uncle are there," Fengjiu said and led him to the main courtyard. In the main courtyard, the maidservants had already served porridge. They usually ate simple and light breakfast. Xianyuan Mose and Guan Shilin sat and chatted while waiting for Fengjiu and the others to come. "You can go back with Episdoe and the others first. I still have to prepare some betrothal gifts, so I might be back later. I'll have to trouble you with the wedding," Xianyuan Mose said to Guan Shilin. Hearing this, Guan Shilin laughed heartily. "You don't have to worry. I'll arrange your marriage personally. When we get back, I'll ask my adoptive father and the others to choose an auspicious date for you." "Thank you." The corners of Xianyuan Mose's lips curled up. He was in a good mood. "Morning." Mo Chen's voice drifted over. The two people in the courtyard looked towards him and saw that he was still dressed in white, exuding the aura of an immortal. Guan Shilin stood up and said with a smile, "Have a seat. I just arrived too. Let's have breakfast together." "Episdoe hasn't woken up yet?" Mo Chen asked as he looked at Xianyuan Mose. "She's up. She went to Hao Er's place. She should be here soon," Xianyuan Mose said and motioned for him to sit down. The maidservant once again set a set of chopsticks and bowls. Guan Shilin also sat down and said with a smile, "We were just talking about their marriage. Those who have been married know that marriage is a major event in life. There are many things that need to be done. Marriage is a major event. Naturally, there are many things that need to be prepared. However, with your help, I think it will be easier for them." Mo Chen said with a smile. He looked at Xianyuan Mose and said, "It hasn't been easy for you to come this far. Now that you're married, you should cherish each other more. Especially you should treat Episdoe better. Xianyuanmos glanced at him and said, she's my wife. She's the woman I love. Naturally, I'll pamper her and love her. Chapter 3374. You're all here. Feng Jiu held Hao Er's hand and walked in. When she saw the three men sitting and talking in the courtyard, she smiled and said to Hao Er, remember to greet him. Call the one in white Uncle Nalen. Okay. Hao Er responded and looked at the man in white. He blinked and whispered to Feng Jiu, Mother, this uncle is very good looking. His father was also good looking, but not that kind of good looking. This uncle in white gave him the feeling of an immortal. After hearing his words, he showed a gentle smile and looked even better. Although Hao Er's voice was lowered, who present could not hear his words. For a moment, Guan Shilin laughed loudly. Mo Chen's smile also deepened. Xianyuanmos glanced at Mo Chen as if he couldn't see what was good about him. Feng Jiu chuckled and scratched Hao Er's nose. Hao Er will be very good looking when he grows up. Father, Uncle Nalen. Hao Er stepped forward, bowed to them respectfully, and greeted them one by one. Mo Chen took out a jade pendant from the space and handed it to him, saying, this is a meeting gift for you. Seeing this, Hao Er raised his head and glanced at his mother, asking silently. Take it. Feng Jiu smiled and gestured. Thank you, Uncle Nalen. Since his mother had spoken, he stepped forward and took it. Then he thanked her and played with the jade pendant in his hand. Come, mother will help you tie it around your waist. Feng Jiu took the jade pendant from his hand and tied it around his waist. Looking at the jade pendant hanging down with only a tassel missing, she smiled and said, later, let Qin Xian tie a tassel for you. You'll look even better. Okay. Hao Er responded and sat next to her. Eat first. The porridge is getting cold. Xianyuanmos scooped a bowl of porridge for Feng Jiu and Hao Er and gave them some snacks to eat. When they were almost done eating, outside the mansion, a spirit beast carriage stopped in front of the door. A man and a woman got out of the carriage and a man in black came forward and knocked on the door. Elder Mei was guarding the door. When he heard someone knocking on the door, he opened it. Just as he was about to ask who it was, he saw the two people standing in front of the spirit beast carriage. His expression changed and he hurried over. Master, Madam, why are you here? Elder Mei asked while looking around, saying, come in. The black tortoise monarch supported his wife as they walked inside. The 8 black-clothed men behind them also walked in. In the mansion, Leng Hua and Du Fan were talking when they saw Elder Mei greet a group of people. The man in the lead looked extraordinary. After he came in, his sharp eyes looked around. Seeing this, the two of them looked at each other and walked forward. Du Fan smiled and asked, Elder Mei, these two are? His gaze fell on the man and woman. These two are the little master's biological parents. Elder Mei said. He looked at Leng Hua and said, Leng Hua, miss, and the others should be in the main courtyard. You go and report. Leng Hua replied before withdrawing his gaze, and then he turned around and left. Chapter 3375. The Black Tortoise Monarch nodded and led his wife inside. He secretly observed the layout of the mansion, as well as the people in the open and in the dark. With his cultivation base, it was easy for him to know that other than the people in the open, there were also quite a number of people hiding in the dark. Looking at the two men just now, they had an extraordinary bearing. If it wasn't for Old Mei's simple introduction, he wouldn't have been able to tell that they were just servants of the mansion. In the hall, the servants served tea and retreated. Du Fan greeted them in the hall. In the main courtyard behind, Feng Nine and the others, who had already asked the servants to remove the food on the table, were chatting when they saw Leng Hua come in. Master, Leng Hua called. Feng Jiu glanced at him. The Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife are here. They are in the front hall, Len Hua said and glanced at Hao. Hearing this, Fengjiu instinctively looked at Hao. For a moment, he was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Xianyuan Mose stood up and said, "Let's go take a look. Let Hao meet them." "Okay," Fengjiu responded. He held Hao's hand and said to Guan Shilin and Mo Chen, "Have some tea first. Let's go meet the guests." "Go ahead." The two nodded. Seeing Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu take Hao out of the courtyard, Mo Chen looked at Guan Shilin and asked, "Why is the Black Tortoise Monarch here? When did they meet?" Guan Shilin smiled and said, "They have never met before. However, it is said that the Black Tortoise Monarch is Hao's biological father. I think they are here to take Hao back." As he spoke, he shook his head and sighed softly. But Hao grew up by Little Nine's side and has never met his biological parents. Now that he's going back with them, I reckon he won't be willing to part with Little Nine and Mose. Hearing Guan Shilin's words, Mo Chen was a little surprised. He did not expect the child's biological father to be the Black Tortoise Monarch. But Fengjiu, was she willing to let them take back the child she had raised for 5 or 6 years? "Mo Chen, I have known you for many years, but I have never seen you with any woman. Have you not met anyone you like all these years?" Guan Shilin asked with a smile. Looking at the seemingly otherworldly immortal in front of him, he was a little curious. In all these years, he had never seen him treat any woman differently, except for his sister, Fengjiu. However, Mo Chen and Xiaojiu had known each other for many years. In the past, it did not feel like he had any romantic feelings for her, so he should not have any improper thoughts about Xiaojiu. After all, he had watched Mose and Xiaojiu go through all the trials and hardships together. A person like him would naturally not get involved in other people's relationships, nor would he fall in love with the other party after knowing that she already had someone else in her heart. However, he had an inexplicable strange feeling that he was treating Xiaojiu differently from before. Hearing Guan Shilin's question, Mo Chen smiled gently. "I am a person who has cut off all 7 emotions and 6 desires. These things do not belong to me." Cut off all 7 emotions and 6 desires. Guan Shilin was stunned. What is going on? Chapter 3376. Guan Shilin stared at him in a daze. Mo Chen was clearly smiling, but there was a sense of loneliness in that smile. He was clearly sitting in front of him, but he gave off an ethereal and distant feeling. In life, there were 7 emotions and 6 desires: joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. If there were no emotions, then what was the meaning of life? You once said that it was to protect Xiaojiu. Guan Shilin looked at him, his heart heavy because of his words. Mo Chen took a sip of tea and said gently, "Yes, she is the star of the phoenix, and I am her guardian star. It is my responsibility to protect her." As he spoke, he smiled again. "This is a responsibility that I was born with. Even if the star of the phoenix was not Fengjiu, I would still do the same." Guan Shilin was silent and did not speak. How could he not know what he was talking about? He said that even if the star of the phoenix was not Xiaojiu, he would still do the same. That was impossible. He knew that Mo Chen treated Xiaojiu differently. If the star of the phoenix was not Xiaojiu, why would he accept the position of the son of the saint to protect her? Enter the sacred tower to sever all emotions and desires to inherit the sacred power. In the end, everything he did was for Xiaojiu. Thinking of this, he sighed softly in his heart. Mo Chen was outstanding. She was outstanding in every aspect. Moreover, she wholeheartedly cared for Little Nine, wholeheartedly protecting her without asking for anything in return. If not for the fact that Xiaojiu and Mose were already in love, it would be hard to say who Xiaojiu's heart would belong to. At the same time, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu, who were leading Hao forward, each held one of Hao's hands. The little guy did not know that the guests in front of him were his biological parents, so his steps were light, and his face was overflowing with smiles. At this moment, Fengjiu looked at Hao and stopped in his tracks. He said softly, Hao, do you know who your mother is bringing you to see? Guest, Hao said, looking up at her. Fengjiu smiled and reached out to caress his tender little face. They're your biological parents. They're here. They're in the front hall. Mother, bring Hao to meet them. Hearing this, the smile on Hao's face disappeared. His little face turned cold, and even his little mouth was tightly pursed. He looked unhappy. Fengjiu squatted down and held his little face in his hands. What's wrong? Are you unhappy? Mother, I don't want to see them. I don't want to go back with them. I don't want to leave father and mother. It's enough for Hao to have you too. I don't want anyone else to be Hao's father and mother. He pouted, his eyes reddened, and his face was full of grievance. When Xianyuan Mose heard this, he could not help but sigh in his heart. This child had been raised by his side for 5 to 6 years, and he was indeed very considerate. However, even if they wanted to keep him, his biological parents would not be willing to let him stay by their side. Hao, be good. Let's go meet them first. Mother won't let them take you away just like that. Fengjiu comforted him and kissed him on the cheek. Only then did she hold his hand and look at Xianyuan Mose. Let's go. Let's meet them first, Xianyuan Mose said. He also held his hand and led them to the front hall. Chapter 3377. A man and a woman with an extraordinary bearing walked in. The man was wearing a black robe, looking calm and luxurious. The woman was wearing a red robe, looking wanton and flamboyant. Between the two of them, there was a small figure wearing a small white robe. The fitting clothes set off the small figure's exquisiteness and unparalleled exquisiteness. The little person's exquisite face and familiar eyes made her eyes redden. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. This was her son, she was so emotional that her body trembled slightly. However, when she saw her son's cold and distant gaze, her heart clenched tightly in pain. Wife. Monarch Xuanwu stood up and walked to her side. He held her hand and patted it gently to comfort her. He also looked forward and calmly sized up the black-robed Xianyuan Mose and red-robed Fengjiu. These two were indeed like dragons and phoenixes. Their auras and appearances were peerless. Even if he stood in front of them, his aura would not be as dazzling as the two in front of him. This kind of kingly aura was extraordinary. It was no wonder that they were recognized as the Emperor Star and the Phoenix Star. I've long heard of your names. Today, I finally get to meet you. Nice to meet you, nice to meet you. Monarch Xuanwu brought his wife forward and bowed to the two of them. As a monarch, bowing to the two of them could be said to be extremely important and respectful. This was not only because of their strength, but also because they had saved his son and raised him. Therefore, the respect he had for them was full. Yama Lord, Ghost Doctor, Monarch Xuanwu's wife called out and bowed slightly. Seeing this, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu looked at each other and said, Please sit. Fengjiu gestured for them to sit. Only then did he sit down with Xianyuan Mose. Hao stood beside Fengjiu, his small hands tightly holding Fengjiu's hand. He only glanced at the two people when he came in, then lowered his eyes and didn't look at them again. In his opinion, they were here to take him away. He didn't like them. Even if his mother said that they were his biological parents, in his eyes, they were like strangers. Yama Lord, Ghost Doctor, let me introduce myself first. My title is Black Tortoise Sovereign, my surname is Dongfang, and my given name is Che. This is my wife, Sima Lanqin. We came here not only for our son, but also because we heard that you and Sovereign Tong Tian were going to fight at Mount Shao. We wanted to help you. Monarch Xuanwu looked at them and said, I've been fighting against Monarch Tongtian for many years. I know him well. If it's a one-on-one fight, he'll definitely use some tricks. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu looked at each other and didn't say anything. When they saw that Sima Lanxin's eyes were fixed on Hao, Fengjiu said, there's no rush. We can talk about it later. She looked at Hao, and brought him forward. She said softly, Hao, come and greet them. Hao, raised his head and looked at the two people who were looking at him with hope. He pursed his lips and lowered his head, unwilling to greet them. Seeing this, Sima Lanxin's tears fell from her eyes. She wiped her tears and said with a choked voice, Child, I am your mother. Chapter 3378. Hearing this, Sima Lanxin's face turned pale. She looked at the child's angry expression and the way he hugged Fengjiu tightly. She felt her heart clenched tightly as if someone was cutting it with a knife. It was so painful that she found it difficult to breathe. How, you can't do this. Fengjiu sighed softly in his heart. He looked at the pale Sima Lanxin and said apologetically, Don't take it to heart. He just can't accept it for a while. I know, Sima Lanxin replied. She wiped her tears with a handkerchief and said, I didn't come to take him away. I just wanted to see if he was doing well. Hao pursed his lips and looked at her with a straight face. I want to be with my father and mother. I don't want to go with you. We are not others. We are your biological parents. The black tortoise monarch saw that his son did not recognize them and sighed in his heart. They did not raise him by their side. So what if he was their biological child? Wasn't he still alienated? Xianyuan Mose glanced at the couple and then looked at Hao, He saw the little guy hugging Fengjiu tightly as if he was afraid of being taken away. He said, Hao, they specially came to see you. No matter what, you should greet them. Hao pursed his lips when he heard his father's words. He glanced at him, then at the two people, and finally at his mother. They are your biological parents. You should greet them, Fengjiu said softly and stroked his head. Seeing this, Hao walked away from Fengjiu's side and walked towards the black tortoise monarch and his wife. He knelt down in front of them. Hao greets father and mother. He didn't want to call them father and mother. His parents were here. His parents were one of a kind. The black tortoise monarch couple saw the little person kneeling in front of them and could not help but feel moved. They quickly helped him up. Good son. Ha 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 ha, good. Sovereign Black Tortoise was overjoyed and laughed loudly. Hao was held in the arms of the two. His small body was also stiff. He stood there stiffly, not knowing what to do. Fengjiu shook her head inwardly when she saw him like that. She said to the two of them, It's rare for the two of you to come here. Why don't you stay here for a few days? This way, they could get to know Hao better. If that's the case, then we'll have to trouble you. The two of them did not refuse. After all, they knew that such an opportunity was hard to come by. If they wanted their children to accept them, they had to spend time together. They chatted in the hall for a while. Hao was originally in Sima Lanxin's arms, but in the end, she couldn't resist Hao's struggle and let him go back to Fengjiu's arms. Fengjiu asked Elder Mei to take them to rest. Then, he and Xianyuan Mose brought Hao back to the main courtyard. On the way, Fengjiu asked, Hao, what do you think of them? Nothing much. Hao pursed his lips and looked at her worriedly. Mother, don't chase Hao away, okay? Hao wants to follow father and mother. Chapter 3379. Really? Hao raised his head and asked. Really? Fengjiu answered with a smile. Hearing this, the little guy secretly planned in his heart. Since his mother said so, as long as he didn't agree to go back with them, he could always stay by his parents' side. At noon, Sima Lanxin came to the main courtyard to find Fengjiu and Hao Er. She wanted to spend more time with him and let him gradually get familiar with her. Xianyuan Mose, the Black Tortoise Monarch, Guan Shilin, and the others were in the main hall talking about the sovereign Tong Tian. On the other side, in the Cerulean sect, Jun Ju Shang, who was sitting cross-legged in cultivation, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground, unconscious. Without anyone to take care of him, no one knew that he had fainted. In the evening, a middle-aged man from the Carefree sect came to the house where Jun Ju Shang was staying. He knocked on the door and called out, "Sect Master." For a long time, no one answered. He called out twice more, but still no one answered. He pushed open the door and walked in. He saw Jun Ju Shang lying on the ground in his white clothes. He was vomiting blood on the ground. Some of the blood had even stained his white clothes. It was a ghastly sight. He couldn't help but cry out in alarm. "Sect Master." He quickly ran forward to help him up and gave him a simple check. His heart couldn't help but sink. After helping him lie down on the bed, he quickly rushed out. After returning, Wanyan Qianhua wandered around the sect. In this sect, she didn't take a step into Jun Ju Shang's house. Today, she walked around the other places and saw the cultivators who gathered in the sect. Those cultivators said that they wanted to fight the sovereign Tong Tian. However, since the sovereign Tong Tian and Xianyuan Mose agreed to fight on the peak, these cultivators didn't leave. Instead, they said that they would find a time to leave together and go to the foot of the peak. As for those people, she didn't pay much attention to them. After seeing them, she forgot about them. Seeing that it was getting late, she jumped down from the tree and walked towards the main peak. However, after walking for some distance, she heard some disciples in the sect discussing. Hearing those voices, she could not help but stop in her tracks. Just now, the elder of the Xiaoyao sect hurriedly went to the Medicine Mountain to find some alchemists. He said that their patriarch vomited blood and fainted. Ah! Was this for real? Jun Ju Shang, the leader of the Carefree sect. He is an expert whose strength is comparable to our sect master. Why would he suddenly vomit blood and faint? I don't know. The pharmacists of Medicine Peak were all invited over, but they all walked out shaking their heads. They seemed to be saying that it was quite serious. I just saw the sect master and a few supremacies go over to take a look. Ah! What should he do? The patriarch of the Xiaoyao sect vomited blood and fainted in our sect. If anything happens to him, it will be our responsibility. Listening to the disciples' discussion, Wanyan Qianhua was stunned and couldn't take a step forward. The voices from earlier echoed in her mind. Jun Ju Shang vomited blood and fainted? And it seems very serious. How could this be? Chapter 3380. Her mind was blank as she walked forward. When she came back to her senses, she had already arrived at the courtyard where Jun Ju Shang lived. She looked at the pharmacists who were shaking their heads as they walked out. She pulled one of them and asked, "How is he? Is it serious?" Seeing that it was Wanyan Qianhua, the pharmacist who was being pulled said, "The situation is not very good. He has lost consciousness. Can't you cure him? Is he injured? Or is he possessed by his inner demons?" asked Wanyan Qianhua. She was clenching her fists. "He's possessed by his inner demons. We don't know." The old pharmacist shook his head and walked away. He murmured, "I wouldn't have thought that someone like the patriarch of the Xiaoyao sect would be trapped by his inner demons one day. Nobody can avoid such a thing." Wanyan Qianhua stood there in a daze. Inner demons? She couldn't help but remember what Fengjiu had told her. He had said that he was possessed by his inner demons and that no medicine was effective, she walked in with heavy steps. When she came to the room, she saw the sect leader talking to a few supremacies. She walked forward and looked at them. "Miss Wanyan, you're here." The middle-aged man who was guarding the bed saw her and hastily greeted her. He knew that the heart demon of the sect leader was none other than Miss Wanyan. Now that the heart demon had formed, blindly suppressing it would only make it stronger. In a situation like the sect leaders, no matter what kind of divine pills or miraculous medicine they used, it was useless. He was suffering from a heart disease, and a heart disease could only be cured by heart medicine. Wanyan Qianhua didn't reply. She just looked at Jun Ju Shang, who was lying on the bed. His face was pale and his breathing was weak. His face was as white as a sheet of paper. He didn't move at all. It was as if he was sleeping forever. She couldn't help but feel nervous. She thought that he had let go. However, when she saw him like this, she realized that he had always been in her heart. She had never let go. She had been deceiving herself all this time. The sect master and the other supremes were surprised to see Wanyan Qianhua crying in front of the bed. They couldn't help but look at each other. They gestured with their hands and the few of them left the room. Even the middle-aged man was called out by them. When they were outside, the sect master looked at the middle-aged man and asked, "What's going on between her and your sect master?" His intuition told him that there was something between them that they didn't know. He couldn't help but think of the time when Wanyan Qianhua was injured and stayed in the carefree sect to recuperate for a long time. After that, she didn't return to the sect but went out to gain experience. Now, looking at these two people, it seemed that something was wrong. The middle-aged man sighed. "Miss Wanyan was the cause of my clan master's inner demon." Hearing this, the supreme headmaster and the others' expressions changed. Their eyes flashed with surprise. The inner demon was caused by Wanyan Qianhua. Everyone present was smart. As soon as he said this, almost everyone understood what was going on. Alas! Since ancient times, love is the most difficult. I didn't expect your sect master to be the same. Forget it. Since this matter was caused by her, she can only solve it. The sect master shook his head and left with his hands behind his back. Chapter 3381. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's eyes brightened. "All right, I will let Miss Wanyan know." He sent them off with a smile before returning to his room. When he entered the room, he saw Wanyan Qianhua sitting by the bed without saying anything. Her beautiful eyes were fixed on his sovereign. Seeing this, he sighed softly and said, "Miss Wanyan, you don't know, but the sovereign hasn't been doing well these past few years." As he spoke, he looked at her, paying attention to the expression on her face. When he saw her expression change slightly, he continued, "This heart demon has been with him for 5 years. The last time I met you on the road, I wanted to tell you, but the sect leader didn't let me. In fact, even if the sect leader didn't admit it, I can see that the sect leader has you in his heart. It's because he has you, but he doesn't dare to love you, that the heart demon has grown and trapped him. Miss Wanyan, the sovereign hasn't had a good night's sleep these past few years. That year, when you left under the cover of night, the sovereign was worried about you and followed you out. That year, he sent you to the family at the foot of the mountain and even watched over you for an entire night. He waited for your fever to subside before returning to the sect. Because he didn't want you to know, he repeatedly instructed that family not to reveal anything to you." As the middle-aged man spoke, he told her all these things that she didn't know. That year, when he found out that she was recuperating at the foot of the mountain, after she left, he went to ask around and found out. However, the sovereign never mentioned these things. When Wanyan Qianhua heard this, she suddenly stood up and turned to leave. Her expression was even colder than before. "Miss Wanyan, where are you going?" The middle-aged man saw her stand up and leave and couldn't help but follow her out. Wanyan Qianhua stopped in her tracks and coldly glanced at him. Do I need to report to you where I'm going? No, it's like this. Just now, your sect master asked you to stay here and help take care of. Before he could finish his words, he saw that the red-clothed Wanyan Qianhua had already left with a cold face. Seeing her turn and leave without hesitation, the middle-aged man was stunned for a moment. He didn't know what he had said wrong. Why did she suddenly turn hostile? Everything was fine just a moment ago. Wanyan Qianhua, who had turned to leave, was now filled with anger. Everything that the middle-aged man said reminded her of that miserable and sad night 5 years ago. He was the one who pushed her away with his own hands. He was the one who used such hurtful words to chase her away. Why should she care about his life and death now? The raging flames of anger burned away her rationality, causing her heart to undulate and her breathing to become slightly chaotic. She only felt that if she did not vent this anger, she really did not know what she would do. Therefore, she did not return to the main peak. Instead, she went directly to the ferocious beast forest behind the sect. She went there alone to fight and vent the anger in her heart. She was angry at herself. She was angry at herself for caring about his life and death. She was angry at herself for not letting him go after so many years. She was angry at herself for being so indecisive. Fengjiu didn't know what was going on in the sect, but CK and Mu Xian were here. Because this matter had something to do with Wanyan Qianhua, the two of them discussed it and reported the situation of the sect leader to Fengjiu. Chapter 3382. Look at you. Are you trying to hit on someone again? Xianyuan Mose walked over and saw her eyes darting around with a glint in them. There was an inexplicable smile on her lips, and he knew that she was thinking about something again. Fengjiu reached out and grabbed him when she saw him. She smiled and said, "Of course not. I just thought of a way to break the strange relationship between my sister and Junju Shang." "Oh. What do you mean?" Xianyuan Mose looked at her with amusement and asked. "You see, both of their hearts belong to each other, but they refuse to admit it. My sister seems to have been hurt by Junju Shang. And Junju Shang is the kind of person who would rather suffer than lose face. He's putting on airs as the patriarch of the sect. He doesn't seem to have any distracting thoughts. It'll be very difficult for either of them to break this situation." She became more and more excited as she spoke. Her eyes narrowed into crescents. She said with a smile, "So, we have to use extreme methods in extreme times. Let my sister force herself on him. It'll be best if she can get pregnant in one night." Hearing her bold idea, Xianyuan Mose raised his eyebrows and said, "Force herself on him? And get pregnant in one night?" He looked at her with a pair of deep black eyes with an indescribable expression. "What do you think? What do you think of my idea?" she asked with a smile. "If you use it on me, I'll definitely clap my hands and cheer." Xianyuan Mose thought to himself. When he thought about what she said about forcing herself on him, he couldn't help but clear his throat. "Are you sure that the two of them love each other?" He cleared his throat and cleared his throat. "Of course. I'm never wrong about people. Also, CK and the others just sent me a message. They said that Junju Shang's heart demon acted up and he fainted. After my sister went to see him, she ran into the ferocious beast's forest." Fengjiu said and sighed, "Say, my sister is beautiful, strong, and has a good family background. She has a lot of young men who admire her, but she fell in love with Junju Shang. Don't you think this is fate? Was it tribulation? Although Junju Shang has a good appearance, he's not young anymore. It's no wonder that he doesn't dare to admit his love." Hearing her words, Xianyuan Mose chuckled and reached out to hold her in his arms. He said, "If you love someone, you have to say it. Age is not a problem. It's just that he doesn't dare to look at it. With his cultivation mentality, he might not care about what the world thinks of him. It's just that he hasn't reached a point where he can go without hesitation. He paused for a moment before continuing, in other words, his love for Wanyan Qianhua hasn't reached the depths of his bones, to the point where he's completely irrational and reckless. That's why I should help them. Fengjiu said with a smile. She withdrew from his embrace and said, actions speak louder than words. I'm going to refine some pills now. I'll send them to her later. Seeing that she was about to do it, Xianyuan Mose stopped her and asked seriously, how do you know that Wanyan Qianhua will agree to your idea? You're forcing her to force herself on him and make her pregnant after one night. This isn't something an ordinary woman can accept. Also, do you know the consequences she'll have to bear if she does this? Chapter 3383. She looked at him and said, do you think my sister is a woman who cares about what others think of her? She has always lived as she pleases and has never cared about what others think of her. Plus, her temperament is not something an ordinary woman can compare to. Since she has already fallen deeply in love with someone, she will not be moved by another man in this lifetime. If it were another woman, they would not be able to bear the consequences. But she can. She smiled and said, plus, right now, she is angry. She is angry that Jun Ju Shang broke her heart back then. Now, if I tell her this idea, based on my understanding of her, she will definitely agree. She pursed her lips and smiled. I don't believe that after one night, Jun Ju Shang will still be able to maintain his demeanor as the sword master of Xiaoyao and treat this night as a dream. Just wait and see. When that time comes, he will be the one chasing after my sister. After hearing what she had to say, Xianyuan Mose felt strange. You've even considered this? Of course. She smiled and raised her chin. I am the ghost doctor, Fengjiu. How could I not calculate this? Seeing her proud look, he remembered the scene when he first met her. He couldn't help but chuckle and ask, then if I didn't chase after you, and you were the one who was moved by me first, would you also force yourself on me? Hearing this, her clear eyes flashed with a smile. She looked at him and asked teasingly, you seem to have a special liking for forcing yourself on me. If that's the case, I can help you. Yes, when we help you, I will let you do whatever you want. Xianyuan Mose said with a smile. Hearing this, Fengjiu pursed her lips and smiled, okay, I will give you a surprise when the time comes. She chuckled and said, I will go and prepare the dan first. My brother is with Hao Er and the Black Tortoise Monarch in the garden. If you don't want to go, then go find Mo Chen for a drink. Go. Xianyuan Mose gestured for her to go about her business. When he saw her leave the courtyard and walk towards the pill courtyard, he called for people to prepare food and wine to be sent to Mo Chen's courtyard. Then, he clasped his hands behind his back and went to Mo Chen's courtyard to drink with him. 2 days later, in the vicious beast forest, Wanyan Qianhua was resting under a tree. Her red clothes were torn by the branches, and her body was stained with some dust. She had hunted many vicious beasts in the past 2 days, and there was not a single injury on her body. With her cultivation, it was already impossible for the ferocious beasts in the ferocious beast forest to harm her. After venting her anger, she gradually calmed down. She sat under the tree and raised her head to look at the leaves above, as well as the azure sky that was faintly discernible through the leaves. Perhaps she had suddenly sensed something. With a thought, she took out a flashing jade card from the space. When the voice from the jade card entered her ears, her beautiful eyes couldn't help but flicker. Her originally listless appearance gradually returned to its normal state. Force myself on him, she muttered. Her expression was a little surprised, and her beautiful eyes flashed. Her heart was faintly moved. If she forced herself on Jun Ju Shang, what would the consequences be? If she could really get pregnant in one night, then what would she have to face? For a moment, she thought in her heart. Wanyan Qianhua had never cared about the opinions of the world. She only needed to know what she wanted. Chapter 3384. Immediately, she leapt up from the ground. Taking a deep breath, she headed toward Sifang City. The next day, Wanyan Qianhua arrived at the Feng Manor. Entering the manor, she headed straight for the main courtyard. When she arrived, she saw a few unfamiliar faces. Glancing around, she recalled what Fengjiu had said to her a few days ago. Thinking about it, those two should be the Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife. "Sis, you've come." When Fengjiu saw her, he smiled and excused himself from the people in the courtyard. He then walked towards Wanyan Qianhua and reached out to hold her hand as they walked out. "Those are Hao Er's birth parents?" Wanyan Qianhua asked and glanced at her. "You're letting them interact like this. Aren't you afraid that Hao Er will leave with them?" Fengjiu smiled. "Since they are Hao Er's birth parents and have come from so far away, how can I not let them interact for a while? Besides, with their strength and cultivation and Hao Er's blood relationship, I feel that it's not bad for Hao Er to have a few more people to take care of him. Only you are magnanimous. You've raised a son for a few years, yet you're not afraid of him being snatched away." As Wanyan Qianhua spoke, the two walked to a pavilion in the garden and sat down. She said, "I came after hearing your news. Do you really have that kind of medicine?" Fengjiu pursed his lips and smiled. "Sis, I am the ghost doctor. What kind of medicine can't I make? Moreover, this kind of medicine that can make a woman pregnant in one night is not difficult to make. As for you, have you really decided?" Wanyan Qianhua glanced at her. "If I hadn't decided, do you think I would have come?" Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled somewhat mischievously. "Sis, you really dare to force yourself on him? Will you?" As she spoke, she took out a book from her space and handed it over. Smiling, she said, "Here, this is what I prepared for you. Take it back and take a look." Wanyan Qianhua glanced at her. After taking the book and flipping it open, her face turned slightly red. She angrily said, "I'm not a little girl who doesn't know anything. How could I use this kind of book?" As she spoke, she pushed the book back and said, "You, on the other hand, will be getting married soon. You can read this book." Fengjiu smiled and took out 2 pills from her space. She opened the 2 bottles and put them on the table. She said, "Sister, look, there are 2 pills here. One is cyan and the other is red. Give the cyan one to Jun Ju Shang and the red one to Jun Ju Shang. You have to take the red one before the battle. Do you understand?" But Wanyan Qianhua hesitated. Her beautiful face flushed red and she was conflicted. "He's still unconscious. You can't let me do that kind of thing to an unconscious person, right?" Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled. "What's so difficult about that? Why don't we just wake him up?" "But can he wake up in his current condition?" Wanyan Qianhua's eyes flashed. "Didn't you see? He's lying there weakly. His face is as white as paper. In his current condition, if I really do something to him, can he withstand it?" Chapter 3385. Hearing this, even Wanyan Qianhua's face became hot. She glared at her and put away the 2 pills on the table. She asked, "You haven't told me how to wake him up." Fengjiu smiled slyly, leaned forward, and whispered a few words in her ear. Finally, she said, "That's all." Hearing her words, Wanyan Qianhua paused and asked, "Can I really get pregnant after one night?" She couldn't help but look forward to it. She even wanted to see how Junju Shang's perfect mask would crack. "Don't worry. With the pills I've refined, I guarantee that you'll get pregnant after one night," she said with a smile, then asked, "But, sister, after you've done this, you're not planning to stay in that sect, are you? How is that possible?" Wanyan Qianhua looked at her. "After this, I'll leave immediately. I've decided to go back to the Wanyan clan in the lower realms. I'll call 13th uncle to go back with me. Also, aren't you going back to get married? I want to attend your wedding banquet as well." She had already made up her mind. Once the matter was done, she would quickly leave, so as to avoid being caught by Jun Ju Shang. She couldn't guarantee that he would still be able to act like an immortal after she forced herself on him. Who knew what that man would be like when he went crazy? It was better for her to leave as soon as possible. That's good too. We won't be staying here for long. After we deal with Sovereign Tong Tian, we'll go back to get married and stay for a while. Feng Jiu smiled at her. When you feel bored in the Wanyan clan, you can go to the Phoenix dynasty. Although there's no dynasty system there, it's still a good place. Also, you can stay in the Peach Blossom Cove for a while. I know. Wanyan Qianhua replied. She stood up. Then I'll leave first. When you fight with Sovereign Tong Tian, you must be careful. We will. Feng Jiu also stood up and personally sent her out. After she left, he didn't rush back to the main courtyard. Instead, he sat in the garden for a while and took out some wine from his space to drink. Why are you sitting here drinking by yourself? Your sister left. Mo Chen walked over from not far away. He had originally wanted to return to the courtyard to rest, but when he saw her, he walked towards the pavilion. Feng Jiu heard the sound and looked back. Seeing that it was him, he smiled. My sister just left. She had something to do and didn't stay long. As she spoke, she took out a cup from her space and poured a cup for him. Try it. Mo Chen sat down across from her. He took a sip of the wine and said warmly, this spirit wine is not bad. It's from my personal collection. She smiled and winked. I wouldn't take it out for an ordinary person to drink. Looking at her smiling face and her eyes full of slyness, Mo Chen's smile deepened. It seems that I'm not an ordinary person in your heart. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to drink this spirit wine from your personal collection. Our years of friendship aren't for nothing. She smiled. We're preparing to go back to the lower realm. Are you staying here or going back home to take a look? Chapter 3386. Feng Jiu nodded. That's true. You came here with us and you've been here for 5 years. It's time to go back and take a look. Mo Chen drank a glass of wine and put it down. He watched as she poured another glass for him. At this moment, his heart skipped a beat. He looked at her and asked gently, Jiu, I've always wanted to ask you a question. Feng Jiu raised her eyebrows and looked at him. What question? Ask away. He picked up the wine glass and swirled it gently. His eyes met hers and he asked, how did you fall in love with Mose? Hearing this, Feng Jiu was stunned, and then she smiled. That smile came from the bottom of her heart, and tenderness and sweetness appeared in her eyes. Him. I don't know how I fell in love with him. I only know that since we first met, we didn't get along well, and we caused quite a few things. Feng Jiu smiled and took a sip of wine. Actually, when I confessed to him and asked him how I felt, I didn't give him a definite answer. Instead, I made a promise of 10 years. But she shook her head and smiled. Although it was a promise of 10 years, we hadn't been apart for 10 years. When we met again, everything went smoothly and we naturally got together. Mo Chen took a sip of wine and lowered his eyes. Not long after, he looked up at her and asked gently, is he the only man you've ever loved? Upon hearing his voice, Feng Jiu turned to look at him. She couldn't help but be stunned by what she saw. The smile in her clear eyes gradually faded, and the smile on her face also faded a little. She looked into his deep eyes, as if she could see the person hidden in the depths of her heart through those eyes, and remember that dust-covered memory. Was it her imagination? She suddenly felt that Mo Chen's eyes were very similar to that person's. When she regained her senses and wanted to take a closer look, she saw that his deep eyes were calm. There was only a hint of curiosity. She couldn't help but smile and shake her head. What was wrong with her? How could he let his imagination run wild? Fengjiu picked up the wine glass and downed it in one gulp. She poured another glass and downed it. Only then did she lower her gaze and slowly say, "In this world, Zhe is the only man I've ever loved. However, in my previous life, I once deeply loved a man, but he died later on." As she said this, Fengjiu picked up the wine glass and downed it again. When Mo Chen heard this, he lowered his gaze and said, "I can only say that you and that person are not fated to be together. He is not the one you are destined to be with. However, he can be considered lucky to have made you fall in love with him." Fengjiu didn't say anything. He just poured another glass of wine and drank it. Because he recalled the events of his previous life, he recalled that person's gaze before he died. His heart was still somewhat shaken. Although so many years had passed and she had already let go of this feeling and accepted a new one, he was still someone she had once loved. No matter how much time had passed, there would still be traces left in her heart. When she picked up the wine glass again, Mo Chen's slender hand stopped her. He took the wine glass from her hand and put it down. She looked at him quietly. Mo Chen smiled helplessly and said, "You've already drunk a lot. You can't just drink like this just because it's a precious wine, right? That's too wasteful." Chapter 3387. Seeing her smile, he stood up and warmly said, "You drank quite a bit on an empty stomach. It's easy for your head to get high. I'll have Leng Hua send you back to sleep." After saying this, he didn't wait for her to say anything before walking out of the pavilion. Leng Hua was in the front yard. Because he knew they were drinking, he didn't walk too close. Only when he saw Mo Chen walk out first did he walk over to greet him. "Young Master Mo Chen." Leng Hua bowed. "Leng Hua, your master drank quite a bit on an empty stomach. She's at the pavilion. Go send her back. Let her sleep for a while." As Mo Chen spoke, he turned around to look. He saw Fengjiu in the pavilion holding her face with one hand and swirling a wine cup with the other. He looked away and indicated for Leng Hua to go forward. Leng Hua looked towards the pavilion and nodded, "Okay, I understand." He watched him leave before walking towards the pavilion. "Master." Leng Hua called out. Looking at her, he asked, "Master, do you want to go back and rest?" Everything was fine. How had she gotten drunk? Fengjiu supported herself on the table and stood up. She smiled and said, "I only drank a few cups. I'm not drunk." "Alright, there's no need for you to send me back. Go do what you need to do. I'll go back on my own." As she spoke, she waved her hand and walked out of the pavilion. Seeing this, Leng Hua followed from a distance. He didn't go forward. That's right. Master didn't seem drunk. But, what were they talking about? Thinking of Mo Chen's expression when he left, although he was smiling, he still felt a strange sense of loneliness. On the other side, after Wanyan Qianhua left the Foam Manor, she headed towards the sect. When she returned to the sect, it was almost evening. She first returned to the main peak to take a bath. After relaxing for a while, she went to Junju Shang's courtyard when the sky turned dark. The moment she entered the courtyard, the middle-aged man who was guarding the courtyard welcomed her with a pleasantly surprised expression. "Young Miss Wanyan. Why are you here?" The middle-aged man was pleasantly surprised. He thought that she would not come back after leaving in anger. He did not expect her to come back. She must be worried about their sect leader. Wanyan Qianhua glanced at him and asked, "Is he still asleep?" "Sect leader hasn't woken up yet. He's been sleeping." "Miss Wanyan, why don't you go in and take a look?" The middle-aged man said as he hurriedly invited her in. Wanyan Qianhua paused for a moment before entering the room. She saw that Junju Shang was still quietly lying on the bed as if he had fallen asleep. Seeing this, Wanyan Qianhua stepped forward and took out a bottle of nutrient solution from the space. Then she said to the middle-aged man, "Help me lift him up." "All right." The middle-aged man stepped forward and stared at the transparent bottle in her hand. He hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but ask, "Miss Wanyan, what is that?" Was he going to feed it to the sect leader? "What does it do?" Wanyan Qianhua glanced at him and said, "This is a nutrient solution made by Fengjiu. It can nourish the body's muscles. Your sect leader is currently unconscious and hasn't eaten anything. His body won't be able to take it for too long." Chapter 3388. Wanyan Qianhui glanced at him and said, "You can go out. I'll stay here." Hearing this, the middle-aged man was startled. He glanced at her and smiled. "All right, I'll be outside. Call me if you need anything." With that, he turned around and walked out, closing the door behind him. After Wanyan Qianhua watched him leave, she carefully fed him the spiritual liquid in her hand. Looking at the unconscious Junju Shang, her eyes flashed. After feeding him the spiritual liquid in her hand, she helped him lie down. She sat beside him and stared at him, as if she was thinking about something. After about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, she walked out and said to the middle-aged man outside, "I'll come back tomorrow." "Oh, all right. Rest early, Miss Wanyan." After watching her leave, he walked into the room. Seeing that the sect master's complexion was better than before and his breathing was more stable, he couldn't help but feel relieved. For the next 2 days, Wanyan Qianhua would go over at night and feed Junju Shang the spiritual liquid. On the night of the 3rd day, when she went over, the middle-aged man in the courtyard welcomed her happily. "Miss Wanyan, our sect master is awake." Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua took a step forward and her eyes flashed. He really woke up. This time, sect master woke up so quickly because of Miss Wanyan. "Miss Wanyan, thank you so much." "Oh right, sect master is waiting for Miss Wanyan inside." "Miss Wanyan, please go in." The middle-aged man's face was full of smiles. After bowing, he left the courtyard. Wanyan Qianhua stood in the courtyard for a long time and didn't go in. In the room, Junju Shang, who heard her coming, didn't see her for a long time. He paused for a moment and walked out. "Why don't you come in?" He stood at the door and looked at her in the courtyard. His voice was as indifferent as before, but there was an unknown dark light in his eyes. Wanyan Qianhua looked up and saw him standing by the door. He was wearing an inner robe and his outer robe was simply draped over his body. His black hair was draped over his back. His handsome face was much better than a few days ago. At this moment, his eyes were fixed on her. She didn't know what she thought of, but she pursed her lips and walked forward, "Go back and lie down as soon as you wake up. I don't have so much spiritual liquid to feed you." Junju Shang watched her walk past him and into the room. His expression softened a little. He turned and walked into the room and sat at the table. "Thank you for these past few days." As he spoke, his gaze fell on her face. Looking at her taut face and indifferent appearance, his gaze could not help but darken a little. Wanyan Qianhua met his gaze indifferently. His voice was calm as he said, "I am only repaying the kindness of the past." Hearing this, Junju Shang fell silent. Wanyan Qianhua also fell silent. The two of them didn't say anything and sat there awkwardly. After a long time, Wanyan Qianhua said, "Since you're awake, you don't need to take the spiritual liquid. If there's nothing else, I'll go back first." She stood up and didn't plan to stay for long. "Wait." Junju Shang called out and stood up as well. "Since you said you want to repay me, then stay in the courtyard and take care of me these days." Chapter 3389. Junju Shang clenched his fist and coughed softly. He looked away and said, "My body hasn't fully recovered yet. I can't leave my side. You said that you want to repay the kindness of those years. Then, stay and take care of me for a few days." Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua's eyes flashed slightly. A strange feeling flashed through her heart. Her gaze also fell on his face, sizing him up, trying to guess his intentions. After a while, she said indifferently, "I will find time to check on your health. But I won't stay in this courtyard to take care of you." Then she walked out and said without looking back, "You're the patriarch of the Xiaoyao sect. It's easy to find someone to take care of you. The elders of your sect are waiting outside." Jun Ju Shang heard her voice disappear. He looked up and saw that she had turned around and left. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He stood there in silence. He didn't know what he was feeling. On one hand, he didn't want to get close to her. He didn't want to have anything to do with her. However, when he woke up and found out that she had been feeding him and taking care of him, his heart couldn't help but tremble. The demon in his heart had become an illness because of her. If he didn't have her in his heart, he wouldn't have been tortured by the demon in his heart. However, he had never experienced. His heart was in a mess. He couldn't think clearly. He didn't know what to do. Wanyan Qianhua left. His words echoed in her ears. She couldn't help but snort coldly. What did he think she was? Do you think you can drive her away just because you want her to stay? Was she, Wanyan Qianhua, the kind of person who could be ordered to come and go as he pleased? She narrowed her eyes and pursed her lips. Her heart was burning with anger. It was good that he woke up. Looking at him, he should be able to take care of her tomorrow. She wanted to see if he could still look at her with that cold face when she forced herself on him. She had to admit that at this moment, she wanted to tear off that cold and indifferent immortal mask on his face. She wanted to see his perfect mask crack. She wanted to see if he would go crazy. Would he also lose his composure? Another day passed by like this. Until the evening of the next day, Wanyan Qianhua finished dealing with the matters at hand. When he felt that he could leave the sect after finishing his business, he took a bath and went to Jun Ju Shang's courtyard. Since she was forcing herself on him, she naturally couldn't wait for him to fully recover. Once he recovered, it wouldn't be so easy to do things. But now, he had already woken up, and his body had gradually recovered after a few days of recuperation. At least, well, there wouldn't be the awkward situation that she was worried about. Jun Ju Shang was lying on the bed, resting with his eyes closed. The middle-aged man beside him was standing beside the bed, asking him about his body's condition. He also asked if there was a need for an alchemist to come and take a look. He spoke for a long time, but the sect master did not respond. Thus, just as he was about to ask again, he saw the sect master open his eyes and look towards the door. "Sect master, what's wrong?" the middle-aged man asked. He also looked towards the door. Seeing that there was no one there, he said, "Young lady Wanyan hasn't come yet." In fact, he was very doubtful. Since the sect master had woken up, would Wanyan Qianhua still come? "You can leave," Jun Ju Shang said and slowly closed his eyes. Chapter 3390. The middle-aged man retreated and closed the door. When he arrived at the courtyard outside, he saw Wanyan Qianhua standing at the entrance. He didn't know what she was thinking. Seeing this, he smiled and walked forward. "Miss Wanyan, you've come. Clan leader is waiting for you." Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua smiled inwardly. Waiting for her? If he knew what she was here for, would he still be lying on the bed waiting for her? Suppressing the strange feeling in her heart, she looked at the middle-aged man and said, "I obtained a pill that can alleviate his heart demon. After using the pill, I need to help him circulate his energy to treat his illness. During this time, you can't disturb him. Go outside and stand guard. If I don't come out, you can't take half a step into this courtyard. You also can't use your divine sense to spy. Otherwise, if you're not careful, your clan leader and I will be in danger. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's expression became serious. Is it a pill refined by the ghost doctor? Miss Wan Yen, can you do it alone? Do you need me to go in and help? Wan Yen Qianhua glanced at him. Is his heart demon caused by you? No. The middle-aged man stiffened and smiled embarrassedly. Then what do you need to help with? Wan Yen Qianhua glanced at him and said, you only need to stand guard outside and not let anyone come near. Don't let anyone disturb us. Hearing this, the middle-aged man couldn't help but ask, Miss Wan Yen, how long will that take? How long? Wan Yen Qianhua's eyes flashed. Her expression was a bit strange and a trace of embarrassment flashed across her face. How would she know how long it would take? This would depend on Junju Shang's endurance and the state of his body. Seeing her strange expression, the middle-aged man called out again, Miss Wan Yen. Wan Yen Qianhua coughed lightly. After thinking for a bit, she said with a serious face, it should be until dawn. In any case, I will come out when it's done. You only need to stand guard. Oh, okay, I understand. Don't worry, Miss Wan Yen. I'll keep a close watch and won't let anyone disturb you. The middle-aged man hurriedly promised. Go ahead. Wan Yen Qianhua gestured, and directly tricked him away. After watching him walk out of the courtyard, she walked into the courtyard. She placed her hands in front of her and formed a soundproof barrier, enveloping the entire courtyard. Only then did she walk in. With Junju Shang's cultivation, he immediately sensed that Wan Yen Qianhua had set up a soundproof enchantment. He felt a little strange in his heart, but he would never have thought that what she was about to do to him would be that kind of thing. At this time, he was thinking, she even set up a soundproof enchantment. Could it be that she has something to say to me? The door was pushed open and Wan Yen Qianhua, dressed in red, walked in. She closed the door behind her and walked into the room. She saw the person sitting on the bed with his eyes open and looking at her. How are you feeling today? Wan Yen Qianhua asked. She didn't walk forward. Instead, she went to the table and poured a cup of water. She walked back and handed the cup in her hand to him. Junju Shang reached out and took it. He said, my body is much better. Wan Yen Qianhua replied. She glanced at him and sat down on a chair. She supported her chin with one hand and looked at the sky outside. It wasn't dark yet. She didn't say anything after coming in. She just kept staring at the sky outside. Junju Shang's eyes flashed and he asked, why did you come here? Chapter 3391. Seeing her reply and then look at the sky outside, he couldn't help but feel strange. What was she waiting for? Just as he was thinking, he saw her take out a jug of wine and a wine cup from her space. Unexpectedly, she just sat there and drank by herself. Seeing that she didn't have any intention of opening her mouth after drinking a few cups of wine, he asked again, why did you come to find me? Wan Yen Qianhua drank another cup of wine before putting it down. She took out a bottle from her sleeve and said, I came to give you some medicine. As she spoke, she took the bottle and walked to the bedside. Then, she poured out the medicinal pill from the bottle. I specially found this. As she spoke, she handed over the medicinal pill in her hand, it's good for your body. Seeing that the green medicinal pill was emitting a sweet fragrance, Junju Shang took a look at it and put it in his mouth. At the same time, he thanked her, thank you. You're welcome. Seeing that he swallowed the medicinal pill, Wan Yen Qianhua smiled and revealed a playful smile. Seeing that playful smile on her lips, his heart skipped a beat. He inexplicably felt that something was strange, but he couldn't tell what it was. Could it be that there was something wrong with the medicinal pill? That was impossible. Because there was no need for her to give him such a problematic medicinal pill. However, if there wasn't a problem with the medicinal pill, then what was the problem? What did that green medicinal pill taste like? Wanyan Qianhua asked. Her beautiful eyes fell on his face. Was there a problem with the medicinal pill? Jun Shang asked. He also looked at her. Did you take a bath? Wanyan Qianhua suddenly asked. Hearing this question, Jun Shang's eyelids twitched. He said, I took a bath. What does that have to do with the medicinal pill? Well, it's good that you took a bath. I also took a bath before coming here. Wanyan Qianhua said. Then, she took out another bottle from her space. She poured out a red medicinal pill and swallowed it. Seeing her swallow a red pill, and then thinking of the strange words she had just asked, his heart suddenly jumped. His heart seemed to beat violently because of the inconceivable thought that suddenly appeared in his mind. Wanyan Qianhua suddenly got up. She walked to the bedside and sat down. A few strands of red silk seemed to have a life of their own as they tied his hands and feet to the bed in the shape of the Chinese character. The spiritual force in his body suddenly dissipated and he was tied to the bed. Even someone as calm as Junju Shang couldn't help but look at Wanyan Qianhua in disbelief. What do you want to do? Wanyan Qianhua glanced at him and said, Isn't this obvious? You still can't see through my intentions. What about this? As soon as she finished speaking, one of her hands came to his chest. Suddenly, with a jolt of spiritual power from her palm, the clothes on his body were torn into pieces and scattered all over the bed. Junju Shang's complexion changed. The clothes on his body were torn into pieces. His 4 limbs were tied to the 4 corners of the bed by the spiritual silk. He used his strength to pull, but there was only strength and no spiritual power. Do you know what you're doing? Hurry up and release me. He shouted in a deep voice. His complexion had also become ashen. He didn't expect her to be so bold, so, was this something a woman could do? This was clearly something only a man would do. What's the hurry? It hasn't started yet. Chapter 3392. Wanyan Qianhua was teasing him. However, she had never done such a thing to a man. Especially when this man was Junju Shang. Moreover, it was when he was sober. It was impossible to say that she wasn't flustered or nervous. She just hid it well. She wanted to be the dominant one, so she couldn't show any signs of fear. Moreover, she didn't want Junju Shang to forget who she was after a night with her. Therefore, she could only do such things when he was sober. Especially when she saw him reveal such an embarrassed and angry expression when he was sober. Seeing him lying on the bed like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, allowing her to do whatever she wanted to him, this feeling made her very happy. Who asked him to hurt her so deeply? Who asked him to speak so sharply and look at her with such disdain? She wanted to see if he really didn't have any feelings for her when he was sober. Her beautiful eyes glanced at his body. Seeing his well-defined and sturdy figure displayed in front of her, she couldn't help but reach out her hand and gently brush away the pieces of cloth that were scattered on his body. Her slender jade-like hand lightly touched him, and she felt his body tense up under her hand. Junju Shang's eyes surged. He looked at her and gritted his teeth. He said in a low voice, "Have you thought about the consequences of doing this?" Wanyan Qianhua looked at him and smiled. Her smile was charming and enchanting. She suddenly leaned forward and said in Junju Shang's ear, "I'll give you a chance. As long as you don't have any distracting thoughts and your body doesn't have any reaction, I'll stop and leave." Her warm breath drifted into his ears, and the fragrance of her body drifted into his nostrils. Her lazy words carried a trace of charm, soft and seductive. As for him, his heart couldn't help but thump against his will. Hearing his fast heartbeat, Wanyan Qianhua's lips curled into a happy smile. She looked at him and got up unhurriedly. She stood by the bed and gently unbuckled the belt around her waist. Then, she hung it on the chair beside her. Junju Shang looked at her unbuckling the belt and taking off her outer clothes. His eyes couldn't help but move. He watched as she took off her clothes one by one, revealing her snow-white skin. She was only left with a red doudou and underwear. In the end, he couldn't help but close his eyes. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Wanyan Qianhua was also nervous. But when she saw him close his eyes, she couldn't help but smile. She didn't take off her clothes. She came to the bed and suppressed her nervousness. She lay on her side on the bed, facing Junju Shang. Wanyan Qianhua's messy and slender hands were like feathers. They gently brushed past his Adam's apple. Her fingers moved down to his chest. She paused for a moment. Then, she carelessly moved them around. She looked at him and said, "I didn't expect your body to be so good. It's better than I expected." Chapter 3393. She looked down. She felt that his body should be fine. As for his stamina, she was the one who did the hard work. He was purely enjoying it and didn't exert much strength. She suddenly remembered the book she had been reading for the past 2 nights. She didn't take the book that Fengjiu gave her, but she had it in her space. She had studied it for the past 2 days, but when she thought of the pictures in the book, her cheeks couldn't help but burn. In the end, she was still a woman. How could she not be impatient? She was lost in her thoughts. Her fingers unconsciously moved around Junju Shang's body. Sometimes she would cut him, sometimes she would brush him like a feather, sometimes she would circle him, sometimes she would. In short, Junju Shang's stiff body gradually started to sweat from his forehead. Perhaps Wanyan Qianhua suddenly came back to her senses and remembered the matter at hand. Therefore, her hands stopped moving around his chest and she glanced down at his lower body. She saw that there was a piece of cloth covering that place. It seemed very calm and didn't have any intention of raising its head. Therefore, she glanced at his face again. When she saw the sweat on his forehead, she couldn't help but reveal a charming smile. Suddenly, she lowered her head and opened her mouth to bite his chest. At this moment, Junju Shang let out a muffled groan. His eyes, which were originally closed, suddenly opened. His body was stimulated. A strange flame quickly rose up in his body and rushed down to his lower body. Sensing the changes in his body, he was embarrassed and angry. The emotionless immortal mask that he had always worn on his face finally cracked at this moment. A dark light surged in his eyes as he stared straight at Wanyan Qianhua. "Your body is reacting." Wanyan Qianhua raised her head and looked at him as she spoke. Because she was half lying on his body and her leg was also on his leg, she naturally sensed the change in a certain part of him at the first moment. At this moment, she wanted to laugh, gloat, and feel proud. Didn't he despise her? Didn't he have a pure heart and few desires? Wasn't he supposed to have no desires and desires? What was the change in his body? Of course, it was a slap in the face. It seems that your body is more honest. She snorted softly and bit him again as if venting her anger. However, this time, she bit his ear directly. Junju Shang's face turned red. It was unknown whether he was embarrassed or annoyed. He pulled at the red silk in his hand. However, he found that the more he pulled, the tighter it became. At this moment, the woman who had been lying on top of him and biting his ear had turned around and sat on his lower abdomen. Just as his breathing became chaotic and his face turned red, he saw her raise her hand and put down the curtain. As the curtains were lowered, the light on the bed was also cut off by the curtains. That hazy feeling was even more seductive. Especially when he saw the woman sitting on his lower abdomen stretch out her hand to untie her hair and push it to the front of her body. At the same time, she took off her red doudou, revealing her perfect and suffocating snow-white body. He could only feel the fire in his body burning even more fiercely. The beautiful woman was sitting on his lower abdomen with her upper body bare. Her silky black hair covered the beauty of her chest. It was so damn tempting. Chapter 3394. However, in the next moment, the woman's body pressed against his. That kind of naked sensation caused his mind to go blank and his heart to become chaotic. As she took the initiative, her hands wandered around his body. The flame that had been dormant in his body for many years was completely released. On this night, he fell with her. The room was brightly lit and the bed was hazy and blurry. Only the sound of the man's heavy breathing and the woman's tender moans could be heard from time to time, adding a touch of color to the room that made people blush and their hearts beat faster. Outside the window, the bright moon was like a shy girl hiding her face in the clouds. Outside the courtyard, the middle-aged man who had been keeping watch for the night slapped his face and muttered, "There are mosquitoes? What the hell?" The middle-aged man raised his sleeve and released some of his spiritual power, finally driving away the mosquitoes. He couldn't help but turn around and look at the courtyard. He couldn't help but be curious. How exactly is Miss Wanyan treating the sect leader? She's been in there for a while now. When will she come out? He wanted to go in and take a look. But then he remembered what she told him before and stopped thinking. The sect leader's heart has always been worried about Miss Wanyan. Perhaps the two of them are having a heart-to-heart talk inside. Perhaps the misunderstanding between the two of them has been cleared up. Or perhaps the sect leader has suddenly become enlightened. Perhaps the Xiaoyao sect will soon have a sect leader's wife. Speaking of which, he was very satisfied with this Wanyan Qianhua. No matter if it was her appearance, bearing, strength, or talent, she was extremely outstanding. Moreover, the Wanyan clan was also a top clan. In addition, she was the sworn sister of Ghost Dr. Fengjiu. With all these relationships added together, she was more than enough to be a good match for their sect leader. He kept watch outside until late at night. Then he casually found a place to close his eyes and rest. When the sky was about to brighten, the middle-aged man looked inside and saw that the courtyard was still very quiet. There was not even half a shadow moving around. As for the sound, he couldn't even think about it. With the soundproof barrier set up, even if he wanted to eavesdrop, he wouldn't be able to hear anything. Right now, he could only wait for Miss Wanyan to say that he would come out after healing his injuries. He sat in front of the courtyard door and kept watch. It wasn't until a faint wisp of morning light rose from the east that he finally saw Wanyan Qianhua, dressed in red, walk out of the room. Seeing her come out, he hurriedly went up to her. "Miss Wanyan, how was it? How is our sect leader? Has his inner demon been removed?" Wanyan Qianhua glanced at him and said, "You can't go in now. He's still circulating his energy to heal his injuries. You can only go in to see him at noon." Miss Wanyan, why is your voice so hoarse?" When the middle-aged man heard that her voice was different from yesterday, he couldn't help but ask worriedly. Seeing that she looked a little uncomfortable, he smiled and said, "I know, you must have stayed up all night to heal the sect master, right? I knew that Miss Wanyan still has our sect leader in her heart." Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua's mouth slightly twitched. He said, "Do as I say. Don't open the soundproof barrier before noon to avoid disturbing him." Chapter 3395. Wanyan Qianhua glanced at him. Seeing that he had promised her, she nodded, then I'll go back first." Then, she didn't look at him and walked away. The middle-aged man watched her leave. Seeing that her body seemed a little stiff and the way she walked was a little strange, he couldn't help but sigh. Miss Wanyan is also stubborn. She clearly cares so much about the sect master. She didn't sleep the entire night because of the sect master and her throat is hoarse. Even her legs must have been sitting cross-legged for too long and her blood is not flowing smoothly. She's already done so much for the sect master, yet she still pretends not to care. He sighed softly and shook his head. I wonder when the sect master will be able to marry such a good woman and make her his wife. He stood with his hands behind his back and glanced at the closed door again. Then, he walked outside the courtyard. Because he remembered Wanyan Qianhua's instructions and because he knew that she wouldn't harm the sect master, and because she said that the sect master was still cultivating to heal his injuries, he didn't want to disturb her and didn't dare to remove the soundproof barrier. After walking outside the courtyard, he suddenly stopped and muttered strangely, "Strange, why do I feel that the Miss Wanyan I saw today is more charming than before? Seems a little more, a little more." He muttered, but couldn't say what he felt for a moment. But at this moment, when he was walking around with nothing to do, he thought of the flirtatious glance she gave him earlier and realized that she was actually more charming than usual. While the middle-aged man was standing guard here, on the other side, Wanyan Qianhua left the sect almost immediately after leaving the middle-aged man's line of sight. She didn't even return to the main peak, nor did she go to Fengjiu in Sifang City. Instead, she went straight to the place she had agreed to meet with Wanyan Shirsan. Wanyan Shirsan waited at a place not far from the sect. He felt strange. Why did Wanyan Qianhua summon him here in such a hurry? Fortunately, he wasn't far from here. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to wait here at the time she said. While waiting, he took out some wine from the space and drank it while looking around. When he saw the red figure rushing over, he smiled and waved at her. "Qianhua, here." When Wanyan Qianhua saw him, she said, "13th uncle, let's leave quickly and go to the mortal world." "What? You look like you're being chased by ghosts. What happened?" Wanyan Shirsan asked and took another sip of wine. "I slept with Junju Shang." As soon as Wanyan Qianhua's voice fell, Wanyan Shirsan spat out a mouthful of wine. Looking at her serious expression, he hurriedly pulled her away. Hurry up, hurry up. Let. In the sect, it wasn't until noon that the middle-aged man guarding the courtyard removed the soundproof barrier. He walked forward with a smile and knocked on the door. "Sect leader. Sect master." He called outside the door, but no one answered. He couldn't help but feel strange. Miss Wanyan clearly said that the sect master would finish his cultivation at this time. Why didn't he hear the sect master's voice? Surprised, he said again, "Sect master, I'm coming in." As he spoke, he carefully pushed open the door and walked in. The moment he entered, he felt a little strange. There seemed to be an indescribably strange smell in the air. When he walked into the room and saw the scene on the bed, he felt as if he was struck by lightning. He was dumbfounded and sucked in a breath of cold air. He let out a sharp cry of surprise. Chapter 3396. Junju Shang, who was lying on the bed, shook his hand and broke the red silk that bound his hands and feet. He then sat up. His naked body was covered with marks. They looked like the scratches of a woman, but they also looked like the marks of being bitten. There were green and red marks all over his entire body. At this moment, his patriarch's usual calm and collected immortal mask had already cracked. At this moment, he was like an enraged lion, his entire body exuding a terrifying aura. His ashen face and the dangerous aura released from his body made him shiver. Wanyan Qianhua, how could she dare to do such a thing? Was she crazy? He thought about how he had been guarding outside for the whole night. He had even been fooled into coming in at noon. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Would the master kill him if he knew? Junju Shang's ashen face took out some clothes from the space and put them on. He covered all the marks on his body with the clothes. Then, he stood up. However, his whole body swayed and he fell back on the bed. "Master!" The middle-aged man called out. He wanted to go forward but couldn't. He could only look at him worriedly. A man like the sect leader was actually raped by Miss Wanyan. Moreover, he was ravaged to the point where he couldn't even stand properly. It was truly pitiful. However, after thinking about it, he felt that other than losing face, the sect leader didn't suffer any losses. At least, Miss Wanyan's figure and appearance were top-notch. Just as he was letting his imagination run wild, he heard a cold voice that sounded like a violent storm. "Where is that woman?" The middle-aged man's heart trembled. He quickly pulled himself together and said, "Miss Wanyan left early in the morning. Originally, she said she was going back to rest, but from the looks of it, she definitely wasn't in the sect right now. How could she possibly stay in the sect and allow their sect leader to find her after she had raped their sect leader? Prepare water to take a bath. Send someone to find her for me." Jun Ju Shang sat on the bed and said coldly. He thought about what happened last night. He wanted to catch that lawless woman and teach her a lesson. "Yes, yes." The middle-aged man quickly replied. He was about to go out when he heard his cold voice again. "If this matter is leaked out, you will be held responsible." "Yes, sect master, don't worry. I will definitely not mention a word about it." He hurriedly promised and left the room, closing the door behind him. When he was outside, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and patted his violently beating heart. Oh my God! It was too exciting. It was too inconceivable, too shocking. Wanyan Qianhua had actually forced himself on their deity-like sect leader. And that Wanyan Qianhua, who had forced himself on their sect leader, was actually able to calmly leave in front of him. Thinking of the marks he saw on the sect leader's body when he went in, he didn't need to think to know that they must have been very intense last night. Otherwise, why would they set up a soundproof barrier? As he walked out, he thought, perhaps the sect leader was calling for help last night, waiting for me to go in and save him. However, I was standing guard outside and really believed Miss Wanyan's words, thinking that she was helping him heal his injuries. Chapter 3397. After the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, Jun Ju Shang soaked in the bathtub. His face was still terribly dark. When he lowered his head and saw the marks on his body, his mind automatically thought of the scene that made him blush and his heart beat faster. Just as he was thinking, his damned body reacted again. When he thought about how she had put on her clothes and stood by the bed looking at him with a provocative and disdainful look, saying those infuriating words, he still gritted his teeth in anger when he thought about it. This woman. He would definitely catch her and let her know the consequences of provoking him. On the other side, Wanyan Qianhua and Wanyan Shirsan, who had already arrived in the lower bound, finally stopped to take a breather. Looking at Wanyan Qianhua, who was sitting under a tree, Wanyan Shirsan walked over and squatted down beside her. He asked, "How did you sleep with Jun Ju Shang? Does he know it was you?" Because last night's exercise was too intense, she didn't have much rest after leaving. She just used the dust cleansing technique to clean her body and hurriedly ran for her life. Until she met up with Wanyan Shirsan, she took him and quickly fled to the lower bound. It could be said that she didn't have much rest. Now that she sat down, her whole body ached. Especially the unspeakable pain between her legs, she felt powerless and tired. She leaned against the big tree and gasped for breath. After taking a sip of water, she said, "He knew it was me. I slept with him when he was awake. It was the medicinal pill that Episdoe gave me that knocked him out and made the spiritual power in his body dissipate. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to succeed." Hearing this, Wanyan Shirsan's face was full of amazement. "You're really good. You're really too daring. That's Jun Ju Shang, the master of the Xiaoyao sect. You actually took advantage of him when he was sick and forced yourself on him. Don't you think you're going overboard with your plundering?" No matter how thick-skinned Wanyan Qianhua was, she couldn't help but blush when she heard this. She coughed softly and said, "13th uncle, it's good that you know this. You can't tell anyone. You can't tell anyone. I know this. But now that we're in the lower bound, are you planning to go back to the Wanyan clan? You slept with him. He won't come looking for you, right? Wanyan Shirsan touched his chin and thought. No. Even if he wants to look for me, he'll probably look for me there. He won't think I'll hide in the lower bound. Wanyan Qianhua said and rubbed her waist. She said, 13th uncle, we're safe of here is safe, let's find a place to rest. I want to soak in the hot water. Then, he said, 13, Shirsan of your courage 2 of your courage 2 of Wanyan of your 13th uncle will of you. Since 13th uncle, your uncle will 13th uncle to run for it. Is? Shirsan. He said Shirsan of he. He stood is. Thank you, 13th uncle. Wanyan Qianhua thanked him. That's enough. We're family. Don't be so formal. Wanyan Shirsan waved his hand and said with a smile, when you have time, you have to tell me about you and Junju Shang. Also, Fengjiu, that girl, actually got involved in this matter. You too. As he spoke, he shook his head and walked away. From afar, his muttering could still be heard. Chapter 3398. She took a deep breath and suppressed the throbbing in her heart. She slowly exhaled and leaned against the big tree to rest with her eyes closed. After a long while, she heard Wanyan Shirsan's voice and opened her eyes. Qianhua, let's go. Let's go to the front. There's a village ahead. I've already asked them to find a place for us to rest. Let's rest in the village for the night and leave tomorrow. Wanyan Shirsan said as he stepped forward and gestured for her to follow him. Okay. Wanyan Qianhua stood up and followed him to the village on the aircraft. It was not until she took a bath in a family in the village and applied medicine on her body that she felt the pain on her body disappear that she let out a sigh of relief and lay down on the bed. The medicine that Episdoe had prepared for her was not bad. As soon as she applied it, the pain gradually disappeared. Now that she was free, she quickly sent a message to Fengjiu and told her about the situation. Qianhua, are you awake? I asked them to cook a few dishes. Come out and eat something. In the courtyard outside, Wanyan Shirsan shouted as he poured wine and drank. He gave this family some money. What did they want? That family quickly sent everything over. Sure enough, no matter where, no matter when, it was inseparable from silver. Wanyan Qianhua walked out and glanced at him with her beautiful eyes. She said, 13th uncle, you didn't want to invite me to eat. You clearly want to listen to gossip. Ha 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 ha, that's right. Come, sit. Wanyan Shirsan laughed and gestured for her to sit down. He was about to pour wine for her when she actually reached out to stop him. No, I can't drink anymore. Wanyan Qianhua said and sat down at the table. I'll just drink water. When Wanyan Shirsan heard this, he couldn't help but be startled. He asked curiously, why can't you drink anymore? A trace of uneasiness flashed across Wanyan Qianhua's face. However, she thought that he had always been a carefree person. Moreover, he knew that she had slept with Junju Shang, so she couldn't hide anything from him in the future. However, it was a little difficult to say it now. Moreover, she didn't know if it was true or not. Thus, she coughed lightly and said, Episdoe said that I should stop drinking during this period of time. As for the reason, well, I'll know after a while. Hearing her vague words, Wanyan Shirsan did not ask further. He just smiled and said, then, let's eat. Come, let's talk about Junju Shang. Why were they entangled with each other again? Also, you slept with him. Was it you or Fengjiu, that sly girl? Seeing that he was curious, Wanyan Qianhua told him everything that had happened in the past few years. When he heard that Junju Shang's inner demon was actually her, Wanyan Shirsan opened his eyes wide in astonishment. He slapped his thigh and laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha. That Jun Ju Shang obviously has the appearance of an immortal who doesn't eat the food of mortals. It turns out that this immortal has already had his heart moved, but he doesn't want to admit it. Ha ha ha, Fengjiu, that sly girl, has a good idea. To deal with a person like him who doesn't listen to reason or force, we have to give him a unique impact. Hee hee, I'm curious now. What kind of expression will he have when he breaks? Chapter 3399. In the main courtyard, Feng Jiu was lying on Xianyuan Mo's shoulder and laughing. After a while, she stopped laughing, and Xianyuan Mo, who was beside her, also looked at her with a smile in his dark eyes. When Feng Jiu heard the news from Wanyan Qianhua, she couldn't stop laughing. When she thought about how Wanyan Qianhua said that she had almost bitten his entire body and left many claw marks, she couldn't help but laugh. Ah, I'm dying of laughter. My sister even told me this. She even said it so clearly. Tell me, how desperate was Jun Ju Shang when he was tied to the bed with his arms and legs spread out? Ha ha ha, I can't help it. When I think of that scene, I want to laugh. She leaned on his shoulder and couldn't stop laughing. Her laughter spread in the courtyard. If Jun Ju Shang can't find her, he will definitely come to find you. Xianyuan Mo said. Fengjiu stopped laughing, but the smile in her eyes didn't disappear. She chuckled and said, we originally discussed going to Shao Mountain, but because Hao Er's parents came, we postponed it for a few days. However, it should be about time to set off. Hearing this, Xianyuan Mo knew what she meant. He nodded and said, okay, then let's talk to Leng Hua and the others. Let's set off together. Okay. She smiled and reached out to hug him. She said, the Black Tortoise Monarch and the others said that they won't force Hao Er to go back with us. Now that we're done with this matter, let's bring Hao Er back to see grandfather and the others. Okay. Xianyuan Mo replied. It could be said that he wasn't worried about the battle at Shao Mountain. After all, these days, the Black Tortoise Monarch had revealed a lot of information about the sovereign of Tongtian to them. They also knew more and were more confident. They said that they were going to set off for Shao Mountain. The group of people set off after nightfall. In this way, they didn't disturb the others in the city and left quietly. At noon on the second day after they left, Jun Ju Shang came to visit. However, when he arrived, only a few servants were left in the mansion. As for Fengjiu and the others, along with the Black Tortoise Monarch and the others, they all went to Shao Mountain. Knowing that they went to Shao Mountain, Jun Ju Shang followed them. Wanyan Qianhua left as if he disappeared. He must have left by using a transmission formation or some other method. That was the only way to find no clues about her leaving. Since he didn't know where she went, he could only start with Fengjiu. Moreover, Fengjiu also had something to do with the elixirs that night. He didn't believe that Fengjiu didn't know what Wanyan Qianhua did. Xianyuan Mo, Fengjiu, and the others went to Shao Mountain. Mo Chen and Guan Shilin naturally followed. The Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife also followed because they were worried about Hao Er following them to the foot of the mountain. Moreover, Jun Ju Shang also followed Fengjiu and the others to Shao Mountain. Each of them was an important person and each of them had amazing strength. Now that they all gathered together, it didn't take long for the sovereign of Tongtian to know the news. Compared to others, he thought more and misunderstood. He thought that those people were going to help Xianyuan Mo and wanted to help him after the battle between him and Xianyuan Mo. If that was the case, he wouldn't be able to leave alive even if he won. Chapter 3400. A middle-aged man standing at the side asked, Sovereign, will you still be going to the Battle of Pyrolite Mountain? Go. Didn't you hear Shadow's report about how many people Xianyuan Mo and the others have gathered to go to Pyrolite Mountain? Xianyuan Mose is already a divine king. It would be one thing if he was alone, but even Fengjiu is going. Black Tortoise and the Holy Son of the Divine Temple are going as well. Can't you see that they're preparing an ambush? He said hatefully, his eyes filled with anger. If I really go, I won't be able to leave alive no matter if I win or lose. Those people are all lying in ambush there. How can they just watch from the sidelines? Hearing this, the middle-aged man knew that he probably wouldn't go to the Battle of Pyrolite Mountain. However, he had already said this. If he didn't go now, it seemed, for a moment, the middle-aged man didn't say anything. He just stood there with his head lowered. Sovereign Tong Tian was silent for a while. He looked at the middle-aged man who was standing there quietly and said, "Go. Tell the people lying in ambush to retreat." "Yes," the middle-aged man replied. He bowed and left. On the other side, Xianyuan Mose and the others who didn't know that Sovereign Tong Tian wasn't going to go to the Battle of Pyrolite Mountain were resting in the forest. The bonfire was burning and the aroma of meat filled the air. They didn't seem to be going to the Battle of Pyrolite Mountain. None of them looked nervous or worried. They only looked relaxed and happy. In particular, they had Hao-er with them. This was the first time the little guy had traveled such a long distance with them. He was very happy along the way. Sovereign Black Tortoise and his wife walked together with their guards. They planned to spend more time with Hao-er. After all, after the battle between Xianyuan Mose and Sovereign Tong Tian ended, Hao-er would follow Fengjiu and the others to the Phoenix dynasty in the lower realm. At that time, it would be even more difficult for them to see him. Therefore, they treasured the time they had now. During these days, they saw how Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose treated Hao-er. They had to admit that even if their child grew up by their side, they wouldn't have taught him as well as they did now. They also knew that Fengjiu and the others really loved Hao-er and raised him like a son. They even helped him contract with a divine beast Snow Wolf for such a young age. Even if he was alone outside, there wouldn't be any problems with the divine beast protecting him. Seeing that they treated their son so sincerely, they were happy from the bottom of their hearts. Now that they saw the child growing up so well, they were naturally relieved. It didn't matter even if the child didn't grow up by their side, because they knew that the child would only grow up better with Feng Nine and the others. "Mother, father, this is the fruit that Uncle Lang Hua and I picked. It's very sweet. Try it." Hao-er came back with a pile of fruits and handed some to Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose. "Okay." Fengjiu took it with a smile. Xianyuan Mose also reached out to take it. Fengjiu took out some water and washed the fruit. Then, he took a bite and nodded. "Yes, it's very sweet. It's delicious." Hao-er smiled happily when he heard that. Then, he walked to the two people sitting at the side. "Father, mother, these are for you." During this period of time, he gradually became closer to them. However, compared to his father and mother, he still couldn't compare. Chapter 3401. When the Black Tortoise Monarch and his wife saw this, they looked at each other and smiled. They reached out to take the fruits and said, "Sit down and rest. Do you want to drink some water?" "I'm not thirsty." Hao-er said and took the fruits to distribute to the others. When Guan Shilin saw that the meat was cooked, he cut some for everyone. He wrapped the meat in large clean leaves and handed it to them. Come, eat some. It's better to eat it while it's hot." Everyone sat around and ate the barbecued meat. At this time, Guan Shilin looked around and asked in surprise, "Why haven't Leng Shuang and Qin Xian come back yet?" Hearing this, Du Fan smiled and said, "They said they were going to look for water nearby. They probably went a little far. However, don't worry about them. Leng Shuang's strength is very difficult for ordinary people to deal with, not to mention Qin Xian. I'll go look for them. You guys eat first." Leng Shuang said and stood up. I'll go with you. Du Fan also stood up. Go. I'll definitely save some barbecued meat for you. Guan Shilin said with a smile and motioned for the two of them to go together. Somewhere in the forest, Leng Shuang and Qin Xian searched for a long time but couldn't find a water source. Seeing that they were going deeper and deeper, Leng Shuang said, "There's no need to look further. There's no water here. We still have some water in the space. It should be enough to support us until we see the village. Well, then let's go back. We've been out for a long time. I don't want the masters to worry." Qin Xian said and walked back with Leng Shuang. However, when they were walking back, they suddenly heard the rustling of the leaves around them. The two of them looked around and stopped at the same time. "Who is it? Come out!" Qin Xian shouted. He, I didn't expect the two little beauties to be so vigilant. They actually discovered us like this. Along with the laughter, a dozen or so rogue cultivators walked out of the forest. Some of them looked to be in their 20s, while others were in their 30s or 40s. The two people in the lead looked to be in their 40s. They were tall and had wretched smiles on their faces. They narrowed their eyes and stared at the two of them. Leng Shuang's beautiful eyes swept over those people coldly, and she had a rough idea of their strength. Ever since her strength had increased, it could be said that she had rarely met such blind people. She did not expect to meet such people who were tired of living in this forest today. Individual cultivators. Qin Xian stared at them with one hand on her waist. "It's been a long time since I've seen beauties as beautiful as you two. How did you two come here in this remote forest? Are they here for us? Ha 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 ha." The man in the lead teased the two of them. His eyes were blatantly looking at their exquisite figures, and the more he looked, the brighter his eyes became. "They're really stunning." A man in his 30s behind them saw that the two women were not frightened by their appearance, and he could not help but be a little cautious. He stepped forward and persuaded, "Big brother, these two women are not right. I think it's better not to touch them." "What are you talking about? You're afraid of just two women. You're just like this. You'll overthink small things. What can these two women do?" The man in the lead snorted coldly. Obviously, he was very displeased with the man's words. Chapter 3402. His intuition would never be wrong. His intuition had saved him many times. He was indeed timid, but it was precisely because of this that he would think more when he encountered trouble. Hearing the man's words, the others laughed and glanced at him contemptuously. They clearly looked down on a timid person like him. When the leader heard this, he frowned and waved his hand impatiently. "You're the most troublesome. Go, go." When the man heard this, he hurriedly ran to the side of the forest. As he ran, he turned back to look at the two women. He just happened to see the woman in black with a face as cold as ice looking at him coldly. His heart jumped in fright, and he hurriedly sped up to leave. After running for some distance, the man thought that he should rest for a while before going back. Thus, he found a place far away to sit down and catch his breath. Leng Hua and Du Fan chatted as they walked. As they talked and laughed, they saw a man under a tree not far away. Du Fan smiled and said, "There's someone over there. Let's go and ask him." Thus, the two of them walked towards the man. When the man who was thinking about something heard the footsteps, he suddenly raised his head and saw two handsome men standing in front of him looking at him. He couldn't help but feel nervous and stuttered as he asked, You, do you want something?" Du Fan smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. We just want to ask if you saw two women nearby. One of them is wearing black, and the other is wearing white. Yes, they're both quite beautiful." When he heard this, the man's heart jumped. He hurriedly said, yes, they're over there." As he spoke, he instinctively pointed in the direction where he had just run from. "Yes, thank you," Du Fan said and walked in that direction with Leng Hua. After walking for some distance, Leng Hua looked back and saw that the man had stood up and was walking with his body tense. It was not until he disappeared into the forest that he sped up and left. "What's wrong?" Du Fan asked and also looked back. "That person is a little strange," Leng Hua said. "He, they must have been scared by Ling Xuan." Du Fan opened the fan in his hand and gently fanned himself. Leng Hua retracted his gaze. That person's strength was low, so he was probably frightened. Therefore, they didn't pay any more attention to it. They collected their thoughts and walked forward. After walking for a while, the two of them smelled the scent of blood before they saw anyone. Du Fan raised his eyebrows and raised his voice. "Did you get into a fight with someone?" The two of them took a deep breath and rushed forward. Not long after, they saw Ling Xuang and Qin Xian collecting the valuables from the people on the ground. Glancing at the dozen or so corpses on the ground, Leng Hua asked, "Just now, we saw a nervous individual cultivator. Was he with them?" They were in the same group. However, that person was quite perceptive. When he saw that the situation was not right, he persuaded these people to leave. However, these people refused to leave, so we sent them on their way. Qin Qin said with a gentle smile on her face. However, her eyes were cold. She had seen all kinds of people. She didn't even frown when she killed these people. "Let's go back. I don't want Master to worry," Leng Xuan said and motioned for them to leave. Chapter 3403. No, there should be enough water in the space. If you want to soak your feet and wash your face, you have to find the village. Leng Xuan said as he followed them back. They returned to the bonfire. As soon as they got close, Fengjiu looked at Ling Xuang and Qin Xian and asked, "Are you in trouble?" "Just a little trouble. It's been solved," Ling Xuang said. Seeing this, Fengjiu nodded and said, "Sit down. Eat some barbecue and rest here tonight. We'll set off tomorrow." "Yes." They answered and sat down by the bonfire. It was late at night and there was nothing to do. Mo Chen set up a small table by the bonfire and took out a chess piece from the space. He said to Xianyuan Mose, "It's still early. Let's play 2 games. Xianyuan Mose glanced at him and sat down opposite him. Fengjiu was chatting with Guan Shilin and the Black Tortoise Monarch couple. Feeling that the night was cold, he said to Qin Xian with a smile, "Qin Xian, play a song for the occasion." "Yes." Qin Xian answered. She went to the side and took out a zither. She put it on her lap and played. The sound of the zither spread like spring water. It was sweet and pleasant. Hearing Qin Xian's music, the corners of everyone's lips curled up slightly. The night was getting darker. The sound of the zither was still lingering in the forest. At this moment, Jun Ju Shang, who had been searching all the way, heard the sound of the zither. A light flashed in his eyes. He looked towards the source of the sound until he saw Fengjiu in a dazzling red robe among the people sitting by the bonfire. Fengjiu. The sudden sound of Fengjiu startled everyone who was listening to the zither. They looked towards the source of the sound and saw a white figure standing on a flying sword in the sky, looking down at the people below. Most of the people sitting by the bonfire hadn't seen Junju Shang before. When they saw him, the guards and Leng Hua instinctively put up a defensive posture. When Fengjiu saw him, he was surprised. Then he smiled and waved at Leng Hua and the others, "Sit down. He's the patriarch of the Xiaoyao sect, Jun Ju Shang." Hearing Fengjiu's words, everyone was stunned. Jun Ju Shang, the leader of the Xiaoyao sect. Why is he here? Xianyuan Mose was about to stand up when Fengjiu pressed down on his shoulder. Continue playing Go with Mo Chen. Fengjiu chuckled and said to him, he came to find me. Don't worry, I will take care of it. Seeing the smile in her eyes, Xianyuan Mose nodded. After glancing at Zheng Zhishang, he withdrew his gaze and placed down a chess piece. He said to Mo Chen, who was sitting across from him, it's your turn. Mo Chen stopped looking at Zheng Zhishang and looked at Fengjiu. Then he looked at Xianyuan Mose and finally at the Go board. Seeing his Go piece, Mo Chen smiled gently and put down a Go piece. The two of them continued to play Go. The others didn't move. Fengjiu stood up and walked forward. She said, didn't you come to find me? Come down and talk. Zheng Zhishang looked at her. Then he got down from the flying sword and walked into the forest with her. Seeing the two of them walking into the dark forest, Guan Shilin rubbed his chin and looked at Xianyuan Mose. He grinned and asked, Mose, do you know why he came? Xianyuan Mose didn't raise his head. He just said, he came for Wanyan Qianhua. Oh, I see. Guan Shilin smiled and nodded. He took out some wine and started chatting with Monarch Black Tortoise. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.